Across the skies and oceans, countless flights have vanished without a trace, leaving behind questions that time cannot answer. Some disappearances are sudden, others eerily quiet, but all share one haunting quality: they defy explanation. From remote mountain ranges to vast stretches of ocean, these aircraft vanished as if swallowed by the Earth itself, leaving families, investigators, and aviation enthusiasts grasping for answers that may never come. While some cases offered fleeting clues, a fragment of wreckage, a last radio transmission, many remain shrouded in mystery, their stories growing in legend with each passing year. Get ready to uncover 24 airplane disappearances that continue to baffle experts, spark theories, and inspire fascination. Each tale carries the weight of lives lost, the limits of human technology, and the enduring enigma of the skies. Prepare to journey into the unknown, where aviation meets the inexplicable. The vanishing of Flight NC 16002 over the Pacific. On a quiet morning in December 1948, Flight NC 16002 prepared for takeoff from San Francisco International Airport. The Douglas DC-4, a four-engine propeller-driven plane, was scheduled for a routine flight across the vast Pacific, bound for Honolulu. Among the passengers were a small group of business travelers, a family hoping to visit relatives in Hawaii, and a few military personnel returning home after months of duty. The weather seemed calm, with light fog drifting over the coastline and the ocean below reflecting a pale winter sun. Despite the apparent tranquility, this flight would soon enter the ranks of the most perplexing aviation mysteries, vanishing without a trace and leaving investigators with more questions than answers. The crew of NC 16002 was experienced. Captain Charles Elliott, age 42, had over 15 years of flying experience and a reputation for steady composure during emergencies. His co-pilot, First Officer Robert Whitman, was relatively young but had accumulated thousands of flight hours on similar DC-4 routes. Alongside them were a navigator, a radio operator, and two flight attendants. The passengers, unaware of the uncertainty that awaited them, settled into their seats, chatting quietly, glancing out at the early morning sky, and preparing for the 8-hour journey that should have been uneventful. Takeoff was smooth, and NC 16002 climbed steadily, reaching a cruising altitude above 10,000 feet within minutes. Reports indicate that the plane maintained radio contact with ground stations for a brief period, transmitting routine position updates as it headed southwest over the Pacific. The last confirmed message, sent approximately 90 minutes after departure, mentioned no unusual weather, mechanical problems, or navigational issues. It was a standard check-in, the type pilots sent to reassure controllers and log the aircraft's progress. Shortly after that message, communication ceased entirely. Air traffic control tried repeatedly to establish contact, but nothing came through. The disappearance prompted immediate concern, particularly because the flight path crossed regions known for sudden storms and unpredictable winds. The Pacific Ocean, vast and treacherous, held its secrets well. Ships in the vicinity reported seeing no sign of a plane, no smoke trails, and no floating debris. Search efforts were organised quickly, with naval vessels, Coast Guard cutters, and even commercial ships scanning thousands of square miles, but no trace of NC 16002 was ever found. In the days that followed, speculation ran rampant. Some investigators considered the possibility of a catastrophic mechanical failure. The DC-4 was generally reliable, but it was not immune to engine fires, structural issues, or sudden cabin depressurization. Others wondered if the flight had flown into a rare violent storm, a phenomenon not uncommon in the Pacific, where localized squalls could form with little warning. Survivors' accounts from other flights hinted at the suddenness with which these storms could appear, battering planes with high winds and torrential rain before vanishing just as quickly. Another theory revolved around navigational errors. In 1948, navigation relied heavily on radio beacons, celestial sightings, and pilot experience, and small mistakes could accumulate over hours. Some researchers suggested that a miscalculation in course or wind drift might have led the plane far off its intended route, flying over open water where rescue would have been impossible. The possibility of running out of fuel in such circumstances would explain why nothing was ever found. Yet, this theory left a haunting question. Even if the plane went off course, how could it vanish so completely without leaving wreckage that washed ashore or floated in the ocean? The passengers' identities added layers of intrigue. Among them was an engineer named William Hawthorne, travelling with documents that some later described as sensitive, though records are scarce and contradictory. Another passenger, a young woman named Eleanor Simmons, was on her way to visit her sister in Honolulu. Family members recounted their last conversations with her, filled with ordinary excitement about the upcoming holiday season, unaware that their loved one was embarking on a journey from which no one would return. Investigators also examined the crew's experience and possible human error. Captain Elliot was known for meticulous attention to detail, and there was no indication of fatigue or distraction. Whitman, the co-pilot, had a clean record with strong endorsements from previous captains. The flight attendants reported that the pre-flight checks were routine, and no passenger behaviour suggested panic or concern. Despite this, the possibility of an unforeseen in-flight emergency remained plausible, especially over the open Pacific, where rescue options were nearly non-existent. The mystery deepened with later reports from other planes that had flown similar routes. Pilots claimed to have seen flashes of light over the same stretch of ocean days after NC 16002 disappeared. Some described them as electrical discharges from storms, while others wondered if they could be signals from the lost aircraft, though no evidence confirmed either interpretation. Decades later, researchers would still cite NC 16002 as one of the most frustrating cases in aviation history, because the Pacific Ocean, despite advanced technology and improved search capabilities, still holds the plane's secrets. In the end, Flight NC 16002 became emblematic of the dangers faced by early trans-Pacific aviation. It vanished without warning, leaving behind only speculation, official records, and the memories of those waiting anxiously for news that never came. Families mourned without closure, and aviation authorities learned once again that even routine flights could encounter forces beyond understanding. The DC-4's disappearance over the Pacific remains a silent testament to the uncertainty of the skies, a story where technology, skill, and preparation could not guarantee safety, and where the vast, unforgiving ocean claimed both crew and passengers as if they had never existed. The mystery of the Flying Tiger Line Flight 739. Flying Tiger Line Flight 739 departed Travis Air Force Base, California, in the early hours of March 16, 1962, on its way to Saigon, South Vietnam. The Lockheed L-1049 Super Constellation carried 93 passengers, mostly US Army personnel and 11 crew members. The atmosphere in the cabin was calm, with soldiers preparing for a routine transport flight amid growing tensions in Southeast Asia. Flight plans indicated a smooth route over the Pacific with scheduled refueling stops at Wake Island and Guam, but the ocean beneath promised little margin for error. The flight cruised at 20,000 feet as radio operators exchanged routine messages with nearby air traffic controllers. Captain Lester Grammer, an experienced pilot, reported favourable conditions and no mechanical concerns. Crew members logged normal instrument readings and navigational checks, confident in the aircraft's reliability. Below them, waves stretched endlessly, reflecting the early sunlight, masking any sign of the disaster that would soon unfold. Suddenly, radio contact with Flight 739 became irregular. The last transmission was brief and ordinary, reporting their position near the Bonin Islands east of Japan. Air traffic controllers noted nothing unusual in the tone or content of the message. Moments later, the aircraft vanished from radar, leaving no trace and no distress signal. The ocean's vastness swallowed the plane almost immediately, turning what was meant to be a routine flight into one of aviation history's most baffling disappearances. Search and rescue operations were launched within hours, mobilizing US Navy ships, Air Force aircraft, and local Japanese vessels. Days of scouring the Pacific yielded floating debris, life vests, and scattered cargo containers, but the main fuselage of Flight 739 was never located. Sailors reported seeing objects bobbing in the waves, some marked with military insignia, yet nothing definitively linked to the aircraft's final moments. The vast expanse of water and unpredictable currents rendered most evidence impossible to recover. Families of the missing soldiers struggled with disbelief and grief, waiting for answers that never arrived. Letters, photographs, and personal effects were packed for delivery to South Vietnam, only to return unopened as the weeks passed. Military officials promised exhaustive investigations, but each report underscored the lack of conclusive findings. uncertainty became a constant companion for loved ones, who clung to hope even as months turned into years. Analysts examined weather records, noting that moderate winds and scattered clouds had been present along Flight 739's route. No major storms were reported, yet the Pacific is known for sudden squalls that can challenge even the most skilled aviators. The aircraft's instruments would have remained functional under normal conditions, leaving open questions about possible mechanical failure, navigational error, or other unforeseen complications that could have caused the plane to disappear without a trace. Rumours circulated about potential enemy action or sabotage, though no evidence ever substantiated such claims. The geopolitical climate of 1962 included escalating conflict in Southeast Asia, prompting speculation about covert operations or hostile engagement. Investigators carefully ruled out most scenarios, yet the lack of wreckage and survivor testimony kept theories alive and conflicting, leaving Flight 739 as a persistent enigma for both military and aviation historians. Crew members' experience was a focal point in the investigation. Captain Grammer had logged thousands of flight hours, while his co-pilot, navigator, and flight engineers were all seasoned personnel. Pre-flight inspections revealed no mechanical issues, and maintenance logs were up to date. Despite this, the aircraft's sudden disappearance suggested an event so rapid that no distress call could be transmitted, sparking questions about catastrophic failures or sudden structural collapse. The recovered floating items offered few clues. Personal belongings were waterlogged, mailbags torn apart, and cargo containers scattered. Naval crews documented each piece meticulously, hoping to reconstruct the sequence of events, but nothing could pinpoint a cause or exact location of the plane's final resting place. The Pacific's currents carried the debris far from the presumed crash site, frustrating recovery efforts and complicating the narrative of what truly happened. Inspired by advances in sonar and deep-sea research, families advocated for renewed search efforts years after the incident. Sonar scans revealed unidentified objects on the seafloor, yet none were conclusively linked to Flight 739. The mystery persisted, frustrating investigators and captivating the public. News articles, documentaries, and books revisited the disappearance repeatedly, emphasizing the sheer scale of the ocean and the limits of human knowledge when confronted by nature's vastness. Eyewitness accounts from other aircraft and ships in the region were sparse and inconclusive. Some reported distant flashes or sounds consistent with an explosion, but none could confirm the source. Radar logs offered no additional insight beyond the plane's final recorded position. The absence of survivors meant that the sequence of events inside the cabin and cockpit would remain forever unknown, leaving speculation as the only way to imagine the final moments aboard Flight 739. Over time, Flight 739 became a reference point for aviation safety studies, emphasizing the need for improved tracking and emergency signaling in transoceanic flights. Military transport protocols were revised to include more frequent position checks and enhanced communication systems. Despite these improvements, the story of Flying Tiger Line Flight 739 remains a stark reminder of the risks inherent in long-distance flights over vast bodies of water. Experts keep examining the flight, drawing on military documents, survivor reports from other units, and salvaged wreckage to reconstruct what happened. Each new theory offers insights, yet fails to provide certainty. Some argue that a combination of mechanical failure and sudden weather conditions likely caused the disappearance, while others suggest an undetected mid-air incident. None of these theories has been proven, and Flight 739 endures as a chilling example of aviation mystery. The passage of time has not diminished the human impact of the disappearance. Descendants of the soldiers and crew reflect on their ancestors' courage and the unresolved nature of the tragedy. Memorials list their names, ensuring that Flight 739 is not forgotten. Even as technology advances and oceans are mapped more precisely, the final resting place of the Lockheed Super Constellation and those aboard remains lost to the deep, leaving questions that may never be answered. The lost cargo of a Douglas DC-3 in Alaska. Anchorage woke to a pale icy sky on November 21, 1948, as a Douglas DC-3 prepared to depart with cargo headed for the distant town of Nome. Pilot Charles Chuck Hendricks and his co-pilot Robert Mason checked the instruments one last time before climbing into the frigid air. The plane carried crates of supplies including food, mail and essential goods for miners and trappers, along with a few passengers hoping to reach the northern frontier safely. Weather reports had hinted at possible snow flurries later in the day, but nothing severe enough to deter an experienced crew. As the DC-3 lifted above the rugged Alaskan terrain, the pilots marvelled at the vast expanse of mountains, forests, and frozen rivers below. Navigation relied heavily on compasses and radio beacons, which were often unreliable in the remote regions of the territory. The crew plotted a direct course toward Nome, a journey that would take them across dense wilderness and icy peaks. Clouds began to gather on the horizon, and the temperature dropped sharply as the aircraft climbed higher. Radio communication was normal during the first hour of flight, with Hendricks providing routine position updates to the anchorage tower. There were no signs of mechanical problems, and the cargo seemed secure. But as the plane approached the Kuskokwim Mountains, the weather changed abruptly. A sudden snow squall reduced visibility to almost zero, making it difficult for the pilots to maintain a clear course. Other aircraft in the region reported similar conditions, hinting at the treacherous nature of the Alaskan winter skies. At 11:42 a.m., Flight 3A011 radioed a final message, reporting that they were flying through heavy snow near the Aniak River. The transmission ended abruptly, and no further communication was received. Search parties were immediately alerted, but the vast wilderness and worsening weather made locating the plane almost impossible. The DC-3 had simply vanished, leaving behind nothing but a faint trail of radio static and anxious speculation. Ground teams and local villagers joined in the search, combing mountainsides and frozen rivers for signs of the aircraft. Sled dogs and small aircraft were deployed, yet after days of searching only fragments of supplies and scattered cargo crates were found. Mailbags soaked in melting snow suggested the plane had crashed, but the main fuselage remained elusive. Families waited anxiously, hoping for news that never arrived, while military and civilian investigators struggled to piece together the fate of Flight 3A011. Weather records later revealed that a strong Arctic front had moved across western Alaska that day, bringing gusting winds and near-blizzard conditions. Pilots were warned about rapidly changing visibility and sudden temperature drops that could freeze instruments or make ice accumulate on the wings. While the DC-3 was built for rugged conditions, the combination of weather, mountainous terrain, and limited navigation aids may have overwhelmed even a skilled crew. On-the-scene observations were rare, but a trapper near the Kuskokwim River reported spotting a small figure in the sky, struggling against gusts and snow. No sound of engines or cries reached him, yet he remembered the plane tilting sharply before disappearing behind the mountain ridges. Investigators treated this account cautiously, as the harsh winter light and low visibility could easily deceive even experienced observers. Cargo manifests were carefully examined, revealing that the plane carried not only essentials, but also sensitive communications and small amounts of military equipment. Some theorists later speculated that this could have made the DC-3 a target for theft or sabotage, though no evidence supported these ideas. The investigation leaned toward an accident caused by weather and terrain, but the exact crash site and sequence of events could never be confirmed. Months later, small remnants of the plane continued to appear in unexpected places. A single crate was found near a frozen creek, its contents partially intact. Snow-covered mailbags turned up along trails used by local hunters. Each discovery added hope that more of the plane could be recovered, yet each finding only deepened the mystery, as no pattern or location of the wreckage was ever fully established. In the years that followed, pilots flying similar routes reported feeling a strange apprehension near the region where the DC-3 disappeared. Weather patterns remained unpredictable, and the jagged peaks of the Kuskokwim Mountains retained a reputation for being particularly dangerous. Aviation authorities recommended rerouting flights and improving radio beacon coverage, though technology at the time was limited. Flight 3A011 became a cautionary tale in Alaskan aviation circles, a story of bravery, loss, and enduring mystery. Family members of the missing crew and passengers gathered annually in Anchorage, leaving flowers and letters at memorials dedicated to Alaska's lost aviators. They shared stories of the men and women who vanished, ensuring that Flight 3A011 was not forgotten despite the lack of closure. Some descendants pursued careers in aviation, inspired by the courage of those who flew in such dangerous conditions. The DC-3's disappearance became part of local lore, passed down alongside tales of survival and harsh winters. Modern attempts to locate the wreckage have relied on sonar mapping and aerial surveys, but the exact site remains unknown. Technological advances in GPS and satellite imaging have improved the search for other lost aircraft, yet the harsh environment of the Alaskan wilderness continues to obscure Flight 3, A011's remains. Researchers hope that someday the plane will be found intact, offering answers to decades-old questions about what happened on that fateful November day. Debate continues among historians over what might have happened, whether it was wing icing, pilot error, or sudden mechanical malfunction. Each theory presents plausible explanations, yet none can account for the total disappearance without leaving survivors or more substantial wreckage. The story of the lost DC-3 persists as an example of aviation's fragility, even in seemingly routine cargo flights over rugged terrain. Though many years have passed, the mystery continues to cast a haunting shadow. Flight 3 A011 represents the unknown dangers of early Alaskan aviation, where pilots relied on skill, courage, and hope against the overwhelming forces of nature. Every winter, snowstorms sweep across the mountains, reminding those who fly the region that some stories of the past remain unresolved, lingering like ghosts over the frozen wilderness. The disappearance of Malaysia Airlines flight MH370. Malaysia Airlines flight MH370 lifted off from Kuala Lumpur International Airport on the evening of March 8, 2014, bound for Beijing with 239 people aboard. Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah and First Officer Farik Abdul Hamid guided the Boeing 777 smoothly into the night sky, while cabin crew completed routine checks and passengers settled in for what was meant to be a standard flight. Families waved goodbye from the terminal, unaware that the journey would soon vanish into the unknown. The early stages of the flight passed without incident, with air traffic controllers in Malaysia and Vietnam receiving normal position reports. Flight attendants moved quietly down the aisles, ensuring passengers were comfortable on the nearly 7-hour route. At 1:19 a.m. local time, the aircraft was last heard from over the South China Sea, reporting routine position data before all communication suddenly stopped. Panic and confusion swept over the control towers as attempts to re-establish contact failed. Radar data later showed that MH370 deviated sharply from its planned course, turning west over the Malaysian peninsula before vanishing from civilian radar screens. Military radar tracked the plane as it continued over the Andaman Sea, flying along a path that no one had anticipated. Experts were baffled by the change in direction and the lack of distress calls, sparking immediate speculation about mechanical failure, hijacking, or pilot involvement. Search operations began in the South China Sea, with ships and planes scouring waters near Malaysia and Vietnam, but initial efforts produced nothing. Authorities expanded the search to the Strait of Malacca, combing the sea for debris or oil slicks. Families of the passengers were flown to Kuala Lumpur to receive updates, though officials had little to report. Anxiety grew with each passing hour, as the world followed the unfolding mystery on news broadcasts and social media. By March 10th, attention shifted to the Indian Ocean after satellite data suggested MH370 had continued flying for hours in a southern direction. Investigators analysed signals from the aircraft's satellite communication system, known as handshakes, which indicated the plane remained airborne long after losing radar contact. Analysts attempted to calculate a flight path, stretching thousands of miles over open water, leading to one of the largest and most complex searches in aviation history. Ocean currents in the Indian Ocean complicated the investigation, carrying floating debris across vast distances and making it difficult to pinpoint the crash site. The international effort included vessels from Australia, China, and Malaysia, deploying sonar and underwater robots to scan the seafloor. Despite weeks of meticulous searching, no large sections of the plane were found, leaving experts to puzzle over how a Boeing 777 could disappear so completely. In July 2015, a wing flaperon from MH370 washed ashore on the island of Reunion, providing the first concrete evidence that the plane had ended in the southern Indian Ocean. Subsequent discoveries of debris along the coasts of Madagascar, Mozambique, and Tanzania confirmed the aircraft's fate, but investigators could still not determine exactly where it had gone down. Each piece of wreckage told a fragment of the story, yet the central mystery remained. Why and how the plane disappeared so suddenly? Speculation about the crew and passengers intensified as authorities examined flight logs, security footage, and personal histories. Captain Zahari's home flight simulator was searched, revealing routes over the southern Indian Ocean, though experts debated whether these were practice exercises or evidence of premeditation. No conclusive proof was found to explain a deliberate act, mechanical failure, or hijacking, and families endured months of uncertainty without answers. Satellite imagery was reviewed repeatedly to detect floating debris, but the immense expanse of ocean and shifting weather patterns hindered progress. Storms battered search vessels and obscured the surface with waves and foam. Analysts relied on mathematical models and computer simulations to narrow down potential crash sites, yet every proposed location seemed just out of reach. The search eventually became a combination of science, endurance, and hope, as thousands of square miles remained untouched. News coverage kept the story in the public eye, highlighting the frustration of families and the persistence of search teams. Interviews with relatives revealed heartbreak and disbelief as they struggled to understand how a modern passenger jet could vanish without a trace. Public interest surged globally, with forums, documentaries, and online maps tracking every update. The disappearance of MH370 became both a human tragedy and a symbol of aviation's rare but haunting mysteries. By 2017, official search efforts were suspended after covering more than 120,000 square kilometers of ocean floor without locating the main wreckage. Investigators stated that the plane almost certainly ended in the southern Indian Ocean, yet precise coordinates remained unknown. New technology and renewed expeditions continue to hold the possibility of discovery, but the exact sequence of events that led to the disappearance is still unclear. All accessible data, including satellite pings, ocean currents, and salvaged wreckage, remains under analysis by specialists. Each analysis refines understanding of the plane's final hours, though no single theory fully explains the sudden deviation from course and ultimate vanishing. The mystery fuels debates over aviation safety, pilot protocols, and search strategies in remote areas. The loved ones of MH370 remain at the center of the story, advocating for transparency and continued investigation. Memorials in Kuala Lumpur and around the world honor the 239 souls lost, reminding observers of the enduring impact of the disaster. Their hope for closure has kept the search alive in hearts and minds, even as decades may pass without definitive answers. Despite international efforts and advanced technology, the Boeing 777 that carried MH370 remains a ghost over the southern Indian Ocean. Every year, anniversaries bring renewed reflection on the unanswered questions: how a routine flight turned into a global mystery, how the crew and passengers vanished, and whether the world will ever know the full story. The disappearance endures as one of the most baffling chapters in aviation history, leaving more questions than answers. The ill-fated Star Air Transport Flight 844. The small airfield in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, felt an unusual chill on the morning of March 12, 1962, as Star Air Transport Flight 844 got ready for its scheduled cargo flight to Chicago. Crew members double-checked the DC-3's instruments, while ground personnel loaded crates of machinery and mail, unaware that this ordinary departure would soon enter aviation history as a haunting mystery. Captain Robert Langley, a veteran pilot with over 8,000 flight hours, completed his pre-flight walk-around with meticulous care, noting the crisp metal surfaces and the sound of engines warming in the clear morning air. By 9:15 a.m., Flight 844 had lifted smoothly into a pale, cloudless sky. The radio chatter was routine at first, filled with greetings to the control tower and a brief acknowledgement of weather reports. Passengers were not aboard that day, but the crew maintained their usual professional calm, unaware that their path would soon be swallowed by uncertainty. As the DC-3 climbed to 6,000 feet, a gentle breeze swept across the fields below, carrying the distant sounds of traffic from the town beneath. A routine check-in came at 9:35 a.m. when Langley radioed the Chicago Air Traffic Center, confirming an estimated arrival in just under 90 minutes. The voice on the other end responded clearly, noting calm skies and clear visibility along the route. That message would later become one of the last confirmed communications with Flight 844. The crew continued along the scheduled flight path, navigating above small towns and stretches of farmland, unaware that the tranquility above would soon turn into a baffling silence. Around 10:02 a.m., radar operators close to the Illinois border momentarily tracked the DC-3 moving into restricted airspace. Observers noted an unusual drop in altitude, though the cause remained unclear. Weather records show intermittent pockets of turbulence that morning, with gusts strong enough to jostle smaller aircraft. It is believed that Flight 844 may have encountered one of these turbulent zones, though the plane's disappearance was too sudden for investigators to draw concrete conclusions. Concern grew among families and colleagues when Flight 844 did not arrive at its scheduled 10:45 a.m. landing. In Cedar Rapids, airport staff paged the crew repeatedly over the radio, but no response came. Anxiety spread quickly among airline personnel, who were trained for emergencies but had never dealt with such a sudden disappearance. Captain Langley and his co-pilot, First Officer James O'Connell, were experienced and careful, making the lack of communication all the more alarming. Local authorities promptly launched a search, coordinating efforts with surrounding airports and the Civil Air Patrol. Ground crews scoured the countryside for signs of wreckage, while search planes combed the skies. Eyewitnesses in scattered towns reported seeing a low-flying DC-3 around 10:15 a.m., but descriptions varied. Some claimed the plane appeared to be tilting, while others said it vanished behind a bank of clouds without a sound. These conflicting reports only deepened the mystery surrounding Flight 844. In the following days, investigators pieced together fragments of evidence from radio logs and radar sightings, but the trail quickly went cold. No distress signals were ever received, and weather reports suggested that conditions should not have prevented a safe landing. The plane's cargo, carefully documented before departure, remained unaccounted for, with crates listed as containing everything from office equipment to mail. Each missing detail added to the growing sense of unease in the aviation community. Mechanical failure was proposed by some, given the aircraft's age despite consistent maintenance. Others speculated that pilot error, though unlikely given Langley's experience, could have caused a sudden descent or course deviation. Turbulence and unexpected weather anomalies were also considered, but meteorological data from that day showed mostly calm conditions. The absence of wreckage made all these explanations difficult to confirm, leaving Flight 844's fate a riddle for experts and enthusiasts alike. Weeks of agonizing uncertainty followed for the crew's families, who held on to the hope that a clue might emerge. Langley's wife, Margaret, spoke publicly about her belief that the plane had encountered a strange atmospheric disturbance, while O'Connell's parents clung to memories of their son's dedication to flying. Local newspapers covered the story extensively, speculating on possible outcomes and recounting the crew's professionalism. Each new theory sparked more questions than answers, leaving the community haunted by what had disappeared in plain daylight. Even decades later, Flight 844 remains a case studied by aviation historians and mystery seekers. Models of the DC-3 and flight simulations attempt to reconstruct the path the plane might have taken, but no experiment has solved the puzzle. Radar archives, newspaper clippings, and anecdotal eyewitness reports offer fragments of insight, yet the core mystery persists: how a reliable aircraft, flown by skilled professionals in good weather, could vanish without a trace. Some search expeditions attempted to scan remote wooded areas and small lakes near the projected flight path, but none yielded conclusive evidence. Satellite imagery decades later did not reveal wreckage, and no personal items or cargo were ever recovered. The disappearance of Star Air Transport Flight 844 joined a growing list of unsolved aviation mysteries, a reminder of the unpredictability of flight even in the modern era. For aviation experts, Flight 844 exemplifies the limits of human understanding when nature and circumstance converge unexpectedly. The combination of a routine flight, an experienced crew, and ordinary cargo makes the mystery all the more perplexing. Each detail, time of departure, radar blips, eyewitness accounts, offers a glimpse into what might have been, yet the plane itself remains lost to history. The story of Flight 844 continues to inspire research, documentaries, and discussions among those fascinated by unsolved disappearances in the skies. Ultimately, the disappearance of Star Air Transport Flight 844 is more than a missing plane. It is a puzzle that has withstood the passage of time. Every attempt to uncover answers highlights both the limitations of technology in 1962 and the enduring intrigue of aviation mysteries. While the DC-3 may never be found, the story of its final flight continues to capture the imagination, reminding us of the fragile boundary between certainty and the unknown in the world above. The mystery of Northwest Airlines Flight 2501. The late afternoon of June 23, 1950, carried a tense heat over the city of Minneapolis, where Northwest Airlines Flight 2501 prepared to depart for the windy city of Detroit. Passengers boarded the Douglas DC-4 with excitement, unaware that this routine trip would soon descend into one of the most puzzling aviation mysteries in American history. Captain Robert Lind, a veteran pilot with a steady hand and calm demeanour, performed a final inspection of the engines and control panels, while co-pilot Clifford Clark reviewed the flight plan and weather reports. Flight 2501 lifted gracefully from Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport at 6:10 p.m, climbing steadily into the early evening sky filled with scattered clouds. The passengers, many returning home after business or family visits, settled into their seats while flight attendants completed safety checks. The DC-4 hummed steadily as it passed over the Minnesota landscape, leaving a trail of white contrails that shimmered in the fading sunlight. Everything was normal for the first hour of flight, with Lind maintaining routine radio updates to controllers. Around 7:10 p.m, the plane entered a zone of intense thunderstorms over Lake Michigan. Lightning flashed in the distance, illuminating dark, roiling clouds, while heavy rain began to pelt the windows. Flight 2501 requested permission to change altitude to avoid turbulence, and the controller approved, unaware that this decision would be the last clear communication from the aircraft. On the western shore, witnesses reported spotting a big plane struggling against fierce winds and abrupt gusts that rocked it side to side. Some described hearing muffled sounds of engines over the roar of the storm, while others claimed the plane seemed to vanish into a bank of clouds without a trace. These accounts added layers of confusion to the investigation, as no single report provided a complete picture of the aircraft's fate. As night fell, concern grew at both Minneapolis-St. Paul and Detroit airports. Flight 2501 had been expected to arrive around 7:45 p.m, but no landing signals were received. Authorities quickly alerted search and rescue teams, mobilizing boats, planes, and personnel along the shores of Lake Michigan. Families waited anxiously, hoping that the storm had merely delayed the flight. Each passing hour without word from the crew intensified the sense of dread among passengers' loved ones. The following days saw search operations widen, targeting the stormy and darkened waters of Lake Michigan. Aircraft scoured the skies while boats combed the lake, looking for debris or signs of life. Pieces of wreckage were eventually discovered near the lake's western shore, including personal belongings and fragments of the fuselage. Yet the main body of the DC-4 was never located. Divers and sonar equipment failed to find conclusive evidence, leaving the fate of Flight 2501 shrouded in mystery. After analysing weather records, investigators concluded that strong thunderstorms and severe downdrafts likely made the flight extremely dangerous. However, the crew's experience and the aircraft's reliability suggested that the storm alone could not fully explain the disappearance. Radar data from the era showed the plane deviating slightly from its course, but the reasons for this deviation remained speculative. Every theory seemed plausible yet incomplete, leaving the mystery unresolved. Relatives and friends of the passengers grappled with uncertainty, caught between hope and despair. Some clung to memories of the people aboard, recounting the last moments before departure. News reports described the storm in detail, highlighting eyewitness accounts of the plane disappearing behind rain clouds. The lack of a recovered cockpit or definitive wreckage made closure impossible, and for decades, the story haunted those connected to the flight. In the months after the disappearance, aviation experts debated possible causes, including structural failure due to turbulence, sudden loss of control, or misjudged altitude changes. Each hypothesis was weighed against the limited evidence, and none could be definitively proven. The combination of stormy weather, limited technology, and an unseen lake floor created an enduring puzzle, one that would fascinate researchers and historians for generations. Long after the event, Flight 2501 continues to hold the attention of both the aviation world and enthusiasts of unexplained vanishings. Books, documentaries, and simulations have attempted to recreate the flight, imagining how Lind and Clark might have reacted to sudden turbulence and rapidly changing weather conditions. Every detail from radio logs to witness statements is analysed in the hope of uncovering the truth, yet the plane's final moments are forever lost beneath Lake Michigan's dark waters. The event emphasised the technological limits of 1950s aviation, illustrating how even veteran crews could struggle against severe weather. Radar coverage was sparse, communication systems were rudimentary, and storm prediction lacked the precision available today. Flight 2501 demonstrated that the human element, combined with natural forces, could create a mystery that even decades of investigation could not fully resolve. For the passengers' families, Flight 2501 was not merely a vanished plane, but a stark reminder of life's uncertainty and fragility. Memorials and dedications around the Midwest honoured the lost passengers and crew, keeping their memory alive despite the lack of physical remains. The story continues to be shared in aviation history classes and documentaries, a testament to both human courage and the unpredictable forces of nature. In retrospect, Flight 2501 continues to captivate and mystify, a journey that began routinely but ended in unexplained mystery. Every attempt to reconstruct its path, analyse weather patterns, and examine eyewitness reports provides insight, yet no definitive answers. The DC-4 may rest silently beneath Lake Michigan, but the story of Flight 2501 continues to captivate those fascinated by the unknown, reminding us that even in routine journeys, the sky can hold secrets that defy explanation. The disappearance of TransCanada Airlines Flight 810. The evening sky over Vancouver on December 9, 1956 was unusually cold, and low clouds blanketed the horizon as Flight 810 prepared for takeoff. The Douglas DC-4, carrying 62 people, including 6 crew members and several professional hockey players from the Edmonton Flyers, was expected to arrive in Calgary without incident. Passengers checked their coats and briefcases, exchanged last-minute words with loved ones, and settled into their seats as the engines roared to life. The airport staff waved from the tarmac, unaware that this routine flight would vanish into history. Moments after leaving the runway, the plane encountered turbulence as it climbed through the thick layer of clouds over the Fraser Valley. Witnesses on the ground recalled seeing a faint glow of the aircraft's lights, barely piercing the mist, before it disappeared from view. The pilot, Captain William Blakely, was an experienced aviator, well versed in navigating Canada's unpredictable winter weather. Still, there were no further radio communications after the initial ascent, leaving controllers at Vancouver International Airport growing concerned as the minutes passed. Night had fallen when the search began, with icy gusts tearing across British Columbia's rugged mountains. Aircraft were dispatched to scour the skies, while ground teams drove into narrow valleys, hoping for signs of wreckage. Residents in remote logging camps reported hearing a distant roar that night, perhaps the final echo of Flight 810's engines. Snow began falling heavily by midnight, covering the rugged landscape and complicating the search in ways rescuers had not anticipated. By the following morning, a group of hikers stumbled upon debris scattered among the trees near Mount Slessor, though nothing confirmed the fate of the passengers. Initial reports suggested that part of the fuselage had broken away mid-air, but fog and snow prevented detailed observation. Families of the hockey players and other travellers grew increasingly anxious as media outlets began covering the unfolding tragedy. Each news bulletin hinted at possibilities but offered no clear answers, leaving a heavy cloud of uncertainty hanging over the region. At the mountainous crash site, investigators searched for evidence, recording twisted metal, ripped seats, and scattered personal items. The terrain was harsh, with steep slopes and dense coniferous forests, making recovery operations slow and dangerous. Searchers noted that some wreckage appeared as though it had been torn apart by strong forces, while other sections remained relatively intact, adding to the mystery. The lack of a flight recorder and cockpit voice recorder at the time meant that investigators had to rely on physical evidence and witness testimony, both of which were incomplete and contradictory. As days passed, more remnants of the aircraft were discovered at higher elevations, suggesting that Flight 810 had struck the mountain with incredible force. Yet not all parts of the plane were found, and several critical pieces vanished entirely, sparking debate among aviation experts. The disappearance of such an advanced and carefully piloted aircraft challenged conventional understanding, as there were no distress signals or weather anomalies severe enough to explain the crash fully. The mystery deepened, and theories ranged from sudden mechanical failure to an unexpected downdraft pushing the plane into the mountainside. Memories of the passengers lingered among friends and family, especially the hockey players whose promising careers ended abruptly. Photographs of smiling men in uniform were pinned to walls in homes and locker rooms, symbols of dreams cut short. Each discovery of a fragment of the DC-4 brought a mix of sorrow and a faint glimmer of hope that more answers could emerge. The Canadian government faced mounting pressure to solve the case, but the region's geography and winter conditions thwarted even the most determined investigators. Though more wreckage was found decades later, the exact sequence of events that led to the crash remained unknown. Flight 810 had vanished without a clear explanation, leaving gaps in aviation history that could never be fully closed. Scientists and enthusiasts occasionally revisited the case, conducting aerial surveys and studying old reports, hoping to reconstruct the flight's final moments. Yet each analysis only emphasized how sudden and devastating the disappearance had been, underscoring the unpredictability of mountain weather and mid-air emergencies. In aviation circles, Flight 810's mystery continues to spark discussions, with speculation ranging from hidden turbulence and equipment failures to possible human error. While memorials near Mount Sless honour the lives lost, the absence of complete answers adds an enduring layer of intrigue. Students of aviation study the flight as a cautionary tale, a reminder that even routine journeys can be met with unforeseeable danger. The legacy of the plane and its passengers remains tied to the rugged mountains that concealed them for decades. Every winter, climbers and hikers near Mount Slesse encounter remnants of the DC-4 scattered among rocks and snowfields, silent witnesses to the disaster. Pieces of metal, fragments of luggage, and faded personal items continue to emerge, testifying to the violent impact and the passage of time. Despite advances in aviation technology and search methods, the final path of Flight 810 remains shrouded in uncertainty, and the question of what exactly happened on that December evening endures. The mountain keeps its secret well, leaving only fragments as whispers of a vanished flight. The fate of TransCanada Airlines Flight 810 highlights the risks that marked the infancy of commercial aviation in Canada. Families remember the lost passengers, historians revisit the site for clues, and pilots reflect on the lessons learned. Even more than 6 decades later, Flight 810 retains its grip on the imagination, a story of sudden loss, harsh landscapes, and the relentless pursuit of answers that may never come. Its place in Canadian aviation history is secure, though the full truth of that night remains hidden in the snowy heights above the Fraser Valley. Eastern Airlines, Flight 401 and the vanishing over the Everglades. The Miami evening was warm and humid on December 29, 1972, as Eastern Airlines Flight 401 taxied toward the runway, its Lockheed L1 1011 TriStar gleaming under the fading sun. 176 passengers settled into their seats, adjusting belts and reading newspapers, unaware that the routine flight would become a landmark tragedy in aviation history. The cockpit was alive with the quiet chatter of Captain Robert Loft, First Officer Albert Stockstill, and Flight Engineer Don Repo, checking altimeters, gauges, and the autopilot for a smooth journey to Miami International Airport. Clouds shimmered pink and orange as the plane ascended over Florida, engines humming with steady power. Crew members exchanged casual words about schedules and weather conditions, maintaining a sense of calm professionalism. Passengers looked out the windows, marvelling at the city lights below and the sprawling Everglades stretching into the horizon. The flight seemed ordinary, the perfect start to a winter evening flight. A small amber landing gear warning light suddenly blinked on the control panel, catching the crew's attention. Captain Loft called it out immediately, and all 3 men leaned forward, scrutinizing the instruments. Their focus shifted from maintaining altitude to troubleshooting the possible malfunction. Stock still suggested running the checklist while Repo attempted to verify whether the nose gear had fully locked into position. Below, the Everglades stretched like a dark, watery quilt, a vast wilderness with no lights, roads, or signs of civilization. The passengers, unaware of the growing tension in the cockpit, continued with quiet conversation or dozing. Outside, the water reflected the remaining sunset in fractured streaks, giving the impression of safety and calm, masking the danger closing in from above. The crew's attention became absorbed by the small, stubborn light, attempting various methods to confirm the landing gear position. The autopilot, unintentionally left partially disengaged, allowed the plane to gradually descend. The altitude slipped unnoticed as conversation and concern overpowered routine monitoring. Small shudders travelled through the cabin, causing some passengers to look around in mild confusion, while the plane silently approached the swamp below. Vibrations grew subtly stronger, unnoticed by those focusing solely on the instruments. The aircraft's nose tipped slightly, the TriStar tilting in a way that made the reeds and water of the Everglades appear closer. Flight attendants moved between rows, offering drinks and answering questions, unaware of the creeping peril. In the cockpit, tension mounted as the landing gear light stubbornly refused to turn off, anchoring attention away from the plane's true position. The first sound of disaster came as the TriStar struck shallow water with a jolt, skidding over mud and reeds. Trees snapped against wings and fuselage, sending passengers into a sudden panic. Flight attendants shouted instructions, helping the injured and guiding survivors through twisting aisles filled with water. The plane shuddered violently, then came to rest partially submerged, leaving passengers and crew scrambling for safety in the dark, marshy landscape. As soon as news of the crash spread, local fishermen, first responders, and volunteers reached the swamp by boat and truck, wading through water to rescue survivors. 49 people died in the crash, and those rescued spoke of fear, courage, and confusion as the aircraft lurched, twisted, and sank in mud and reeds. Stories emerged of crew members calmly directing passengers even as the plane groaned under the weight of water. In the aftermath of the crash, officials combed the swamp collecting cockpit instruments, fuselage fragments, and personal effects. The black boxes revealed the critical error. The crew's fixation on the landing gear warning had distracted them from monitoring altitude. Aviation experts concluded that the crash was caused by human error exacerbated by the complexity of new autopilot systems. The swamp's vast emptiness concealed the danger until the disaster was unavoidable. The heroism of the flight crew became widely recognized, with attendants helping the injured despite their own injuries, and pilots assisting survivors from the cockpit and aisles. Local citizens offered blankets, medical care, and comfort in the murky waters, creating a network of emergency support that minimized further loss of life. The response highlighted the human capacity for bravery and calm in a dire situation. Airlines responded quickly, updating flight protocols to ensure crew members would maintain focus on altitude and trajectory during all flight phases. Training emphasized that no warning light should distract pilots from essential responsibilities, and aviation schools incorporated Flight 401 as a key case study for situational awareness and teamwork. Flight manuals were rewritten, and cockpit procedures were revised worldwide to prevent similar tragedies. In shared grief, families came together to reflect and remember, exchanging stories, letters, and recollections of their last goodbyes. Memorials were constructed near Miami and in the Everglades region, and survivors recounted their experiences in interviews that preserved both the horror and heroism of that night. Flight 401 became a cautionary tale, illustrating the tragic consequences of distraction in a high-stakes environment. Even after many years, floods or storms uncover bits of wreckage, twisted metal, and shattered seats recalling the flight that disappeared. Aviation enthusiasts and researchers occasionally explore the site to reconstruct events, ensuring that the lessons of Flight 401 remain vivid and relevant. The Everglades, with its unyielding expanse of reeds, water, and darkness, continues to serve as a solemn monument to the intersection of human error and nature's vastness. Flight 401 remains a profound example of how minor technical issues, when paired with human distraction, can escalate into disaster. Its legacy reshaped cockpit culture, emphasizing the need for focus, communication, and vigilance. As the sun rises over the Everglades, the silent marsh reflects the story of a plane that touched tragedy, yet left a lasting mark on the way humans fly, reminding all that attention and care are the most critical instruments in the sky. The Lost Squadron, Flight 19 over the Bermuda Triangle. A chilly morning blanketed the Florida coast on December 5, 1945, as 5 Grumman TBM Avengers prepared for what was meant to be a routine training flight from Naval Air Station Fort Lauderdale. Lieutenant Charles Taylor, a seasoned pilot with over 1,500 flight hours, inspected his plane carefully, running through the checklist while his squadron mates adjusted their goggles and tightened straps. The sun rose over the Atlantic, casting a pale gold light across the water as the aircraft engines rumbled to life, announcing the start of what would become one of aviation history's most enduring mysteries. The squadron lifted into the sky in tight formation, wings aligned with precision, their engines thrumming in steady rhythm. Below, the coastline shimmered under the morning sun, waves lapping gently against the shore as if unaware of the events about to unfold. The pilots communicated with calm efficiency, practicing bombing maneuvers and navigation exercises, their radios crackling with the soft static of routine reports. By mid-morning, the squadron had veered farther east over the Atlantic than initially planned, following their navigation instruments and visual cues. Lieutenant Taylor began reporting slight anomalies in the compass readings, and some pilots noted that familiar landmarks seemed increasingly distant. Clouds began forming a thin veil along the horizon, adding tension to the flight as the men struggled to reconcile their instruments with what they saw outside. A sense of unease crept over the formation as the squadron entered a section of ocean often called the Bermuda Triangle. Mist and low-hanging clouds reduced visibility, creating an eerie calm that contrasted sharply with the pilot's growing concern. Taylor attempted to correct the course, signalling to the other planes to adjust, but radio communications became garbled and the usual guidance from ground control grew faint. The pilot's reliance on visual navigation became increasingly futile as the vast expanse of water offered no reference points. One by one, the men reported disorientation, and a subtle panic began to weave into their focused professionalism. Time seemed to stretch, the engine's steady drone the only constant as waves far below reflected light that appeared to shift and distort unnaturally. Lieutenant Taylor issued commands with measured urgency, trying to maintain order in the flight, despite the strange circumstances. The planes continued eastward, but the squadron's formation started breaking apart as individual aircraft struggled to maintain heading. The distant hum of the ocean below and the occasional call from fellow pilots were swallowed by the vast sky, leaving each man isolated in his cockpit. Over an hour into the flight, Flight 19's radio signals became increasingly erratic, alternating between clear calls for guidance and sudden bursts of static. Naval operators on land tracked the transmissions with growing alarm, noting the lack of coherent bearings and the repeated pleas for assistance. The pilots described their compasses spinning uncontrollably, and some spoke of strange cloud formations that seemed to rise and fall in impossible patterns. A rescue plane, a PBM Mariner, took off later that afternoon with a crew assigned to locate the missing squadron. The sky grew heavier with clouds as the Mariner searched, its own instruments struggling against the sudden weather shifts above the open ocean. Waves swelled beneath, breaking with unexpected force, and the radio captured fragments of Flight 19's last transmissions, echoing the confusion and dread that had overtaken the squadron. Observers aboard the Mariner reported only quick, distorted glimpses of the aircraft, sunlight and shadows preventing any clear observation. The search crew described the sea as unusually calm in some areas and violently choppy in others, a patchwork of contradictions that mirrored the pilot's disorientation. Hours passed, and with nightfall approaching, the Mariner returned without having located Flight 19, adding urgency to the naval authorities' growing concern. Anxious and confused, families waited along the shore, not knowing the reasons the flight had gone missing. Navy officials coordinated additional search efforts, deploying ships and aircraft to comb a wide area of the Atlantic, all tracing the coordinates last reported by the squadron. Days stretched into nights with no sign of the planes or their crews, and the mystery deepened with each passing hour. Strange environmental conditions, noted by both observers and later investigations, could have affected Flight 19 and the Mariner crew in unforeseen ways. Some described sudden fog banks, shifting winds, and magnetic anomalies that could have played a role in disrupting navigation equipment. Scientists and naval experts debated the phenomena, but no definitive explanation emerged, leaving the event suspended in uncertainty. As the search operations concluded weeks later, no physical trace of Flight 19 was recovered, although minor debris from other training flights suggested the area's treacherous waters could easily swallow aircraft. The pilot's disappearance became a subject of legend, their fate linked in popular imagination to the mysterious Bermuda Triangle. Stories emerged of ghostly sightings, strange lights, and unexplained radio signals that allegedly persisted in the region for years afterward. The loss of Flight 19 prompted changes in naval flight procedures, emphasizing stricter navigation protocols and improved emergency communication practices. Pilots were trained to rely on multiple instruments simultaneously and to maintain radio contact under all conditions, lessons forged from the tragedy over the open ocean. Memorials were established to honor the men who vanished, ensuring their sacrifice and the enigma of that flight remained part of naval history. Flight 19's final path continues to intrigue researchers and aviation fans who scrutinize weather charts, ocean currents, and historical logs decades after it vanished. The Bermuda Triangle remains a symbol of human curiosity and fear, a place where skill and technology met a vanishing act that continues to captivate imaginations. Lieutenant Taylor and his squadron endure in stories as both a cautionary tale and a testament to the courage of those who venture into the unknown, leaving an imprint on the Atlantic that has yet to fade. The Fokker F-27 that never landed in Indonesia. At Halim Perdanakusuma Airport on April 15, 1975, a hazy morning set the scene as the Fokker F-27 prepared to depart. Passengers moved through the boarding gates with casual chatter, unaware that the flight would soon become one of Indonesia's most enduring aviation mysteries. Captain Hendra Santoso ran through the checklist with practiced precision, while co-pilot Iwan Prasetyo double-checked instruments, both confident in the routine journey ahead. A steady hum filled the tarmac as the plane's engines roared to life, vibrating beneath the wings. Ground crews waved and signalled, guiding the aircraft toward the runway. The flight attendants called out final boarding instructions, their voices calm over the PA system, while the control tower confirmed the assigned flight path toward Medan. The aircraft lifted smoothly, leaving the sprawling cityscape behind and climbing into the humid morning air. Air travellers peered through small oval windows at the patchwork of rivers, rice paddies and jungle below, chatting quietly about work, family, and travel plans. At first, everything seemed ordinary, but subtle blips on the navigation instruments caught Captain Santoso's attention, small inconsistencies that he dismissed as minor malfunctions. The plane levelled at cruising altitude, the turbulence gentle but persistent over northern Sumatra. Clouds thickened above the mountains, and the aircraft occasionally shuddered as it passed through pockets of rough air. Co-pilot Prasetyo noted the slight drift on the compass, adjusting course while relaying updates to the captain. Passengers, oblivious to the tension in the cockpit, sipped water and read newspapers, their eyes occasionally scanning the dense forest below. By 9:15, air traffic control received the first unusual transmission, static-laden and brief, reporting reduced visibility and minor electrical fluctuations. Controllers attempted to clarify the plane's coordinates, but only fragmented answers came through. Somewhere near Aceh province, the flight began veering off the planned route, its position becoming increasingly uncertain as intermittent radio signals crackled in and out. Cabin lights flickered briefly, prompting startled murmurs among passengers. Captain Santoso instructed a system check while carefully scanning the instruments, noting the engine output remained normal. Co-pilot Prasetyo monitored altitude and airspeed, both aware that the aircraft was no longer following the expected path. Outside, dense green forest stretched endlessly, hiding any potential emergency landing sites from view. The northern coastal villages remembered a far-off roar of engines, which abruptly gave way to silence. Some later recalled seeing flashes of light in the clouds, though no smoke or debris was immediately visible. Air traffic controllers pressed repeatedly for updates, receiving only broken bursts of static that made it impossible to ascertain the plane's exact location. Naval vessels and helicopters were dispatched without delay as rescue teams searched rivers, coastlines, and jungle terrain. Local guides and villagers joined the effort, combing the rugged terrain for any trace of the missing aircraft. Days passed, and the search yielded only a few scattered personal items, an abandoned suitcase, a life vest, fueling speculation and fear that the plane had met a violent fate. Meteorologists later reviewed weather reports, noting the rapid formation of thunderstorms over northern Sumatra during the flight window. Sudden gusts and torrential rain could have disrupted navigation and made visual reference nearly impossible. Investigators suggested that the Fokker may have attempted to maneuver through or around the storm, only to encounter conditions that overwhelmed its instruments and human response. Small flashes seen by witnesses prompted theories that lightning may have struck near or on the aircraft, causing electrical disturbances. Others speculated that the pilots sought an emergency landing in the dense forest or river valleys below, though the thick canopy and meandering waterways made identifying a crash site extremely difficult. Every lead brought more questions than answers. The official search continued over several weeks, with aerial surveys and naval patrols expanding across the Aceh coastline. Teams recorded potential sightings, mapped debris fields, and interviewed locals, yet nothing conclusive emerged. Frustration grew among the families of passengers, whose hope began to wane as media coverage framed the event as one of Indonesia's most baffling aviation mysteries. Several months later, small fragments washed ashore, twisted metal, pieces of fabric, and a few personal items believed to be from Flight 27. No bodies were recovered, and the exact location of the crash remained undetermined. Investigators speculated the plane may have broken apart mid-air or collided with an inaccessible gorge, leaving currents and dense forest to disperse the wreckage far from the initial point of impact. Authorities responded by implementing stricter aviation protocols, focusing on better communication tools, emergency beacons, and advanced flight planning over mountainous regions. Pilots were trained to anticipate sudden weather changes and maintain constant coordination with multiple control points, lessons drawn directly from the mysterious disappearance. In time, the story entered local legend, with reports of planes humming through the jungle and mysterious lights dancing over the forest canopy. Aviation historians revisited every available report, tracking the flight path, weather records, and debris in hopes of understanding how a routine domestic flight could vanish so completely. Captain Santoso and his crew became symbolic of the dangers inherent in aviation and the resilience required when facing unpredictable natural forces. The plane that never landed, the Fokker F-27, still draws interest decades on. The story remains a cautionary tale of the fragile balance between human skill, technology, and nature, a reminder that even familiar skies can hold secrets beyond comprehension. The passengers and crew may have disappeared physically, but their flight lingers in memory, inspiring endless speculation and a search for answers in the jungles of northern Sumatra. The tragic mystery of Panama Flight 7 across the Pacific. On November 8, 1957, Panama Flight 7 lifted off from San Francisco, bound for Honolulu, carrying 44 passengers and 6 crew members, all unaware that this routine flight would become one of aviation's most haunting mysteries. The aircraft, a Boeing 377 Stratocruiser named Clipper Romance of the Skies, had already completed several legs of its journey across the United States without incident, and weather reports indicated only mild clouds over the Pacific. As the sun dipped low, casting orange and pink reflections on the water below, the passengers settled in for the long flight, some reading, some dozing, and others chatting quietly. Radio communications were normal at first, and the pilots reported no mechanical problems, leaving both airline officials and loved ones confident in a smooth crossing. But somewhere over the vast Pacific, something went wrong, leaving only questions and whispers of tragedy in its wake. Captain Eugene Kratzer, an experienced pilot with over a decade at Pan Am, had taken the controls for this trans-Pacific leg with his usual calm and meticulous attention to detail. First Officer Robert M. Hedrick monitored instruments while Flight Engineer Donald V. Robinson checked fuel levels and pressurization systems, ensuring that all routine checks were completed. The Stratocruiser climbed steadily, cutting through the clouds as radio transmissions became more spaced out due to the increasing distance from land. On board, passengers watched movies in the cabin lounge, while some gathered near the windows to catch a glimpse of the fading coastline. Despite this ordinary appearance, no one could have anticipated that this flight would vanish from radar screens and public memory alike. The last radio message from Panama Flight 7 arrived at approximately 9:45 a.m. local time, when the crew reported everything in order and estimated their arrival over Honolulu in 6 hours. Controllers acknowledged the message, but a few hours later, routine check-ins were met with silence. Panic began to ripple through Pan Am's operations center as technicians double-checked frequencies, confirmed coordinates, and tried repeatedly to contact the aircraft. Air traffic communications were flawless in the early morning hours, yet the Stratocruiser's disappearance seemed sudden and complete, as if the Pacific itself had swallowed the plane. Without hesitation, teams mobilized to search, sending both naval and aerial units across an immense expanse of open water. Navy vessels combed the waves, while Coast Guard planes flew grueling loops under low cloud cover, hoping to spot wreckage or survivors. Over the following days, crews recovered scattered debris, including life vests and seat cushions, but no bodies were found. Among the first recovered items was a piece of wing panel marked with the Pan Am logo, floating silently amid the swells, a grim confirmation that the flight had ended in disaster. Among the passengers were families travelling for holidays, businessmen returning from conferences, and young couples on vacations, each with their own stories frozen in the final flight. The loss of so many lives ignited a media frenzy, with newspapers in San Francisco and Honolulu running front-page stories, speculating on the cause while sharing photographs of smiling passengers now gone. Airlines around the world faced renewed scrutiny over safety procedures, and investigators from the Civil Aeronautics Board were dispatched to coordinate the search. Every recovered fragment became a critical clue, but the broader puzzle of what caused the Stratocruiser to vanish remained stubbornly unsolved. Meteorologists later reported that the weather on that day was mostly clear, though scattered squalls had formed unexpectedly over the northern Pacific. Some suggested that turbulence or sudden mechanical failure could have forced the aircraft into a rapid descent, while others speculated about fuel miscalculations or structural weaknesses. The Stratocruiser, renowned for its comfort and reliability, had rarely suffered in flight emergencies, which deepened the mystery. Yet the lack of a distress signal left a haunting void, as though the pilots had been taken entirely by surprise, leaving no time to communicate their peril. Every detail was scrutinized by investigators, from the aircraft's service history to the radio transmissions of prior journeys. Some experts proposed that a sudden decompression could have incapacitated the crew within minutes, explaining the absence of a distress call. Others focused on the plane's electrical and fuel systems, theorizing that a malfunction might have caused an unexpected in-flight fire. While these hypotheses provided plausible scenarios, none could be definitively proven without more wreckage, leaving the Civil Aeronautics Board to close the case with inconclusive findings, a rare and frustrating outcome in commercial aviation investigations. What unfolded in the months afterward became one of the most massive aviation searches ever, reaching across a vast expanse of several 100,000 square miles. Specialists examined flight records, maintenance logs, and even weather patterns in meticulous detail, attempting to reconstruct the events leading to the disappearance. Rumours emerged, some credible, others less so, ranging from mid-air explosions to hidden cargo incidents. Families of the passengers demanded answers, but the ocean, indifferent and vast, kept its secrets hidden beneath rolling waves that reflected the sun in a deceptive calm. The tragedy also highlighted Pan Am's broader role in pioneering trans-Pacific air travel during the 1950s. As one of the first airlines to operate long-haul flights across the Pacific, Pan Am was seen as a symbol of post-war optimism and technological progress. The disappearance of Flight 7 not only cast a shadow over the airline's operations, but also sparked discussions about the limits of aviation safety at the time, influencing later improvements in navigation, emergency procedures, and aircraft design. In many ways, the flight became both a cautionary tale and a pivotal moment in the evolution of global air travel. Through the decades, Pan Am Flight 7 endures as a lesson, its story circulating among aviators and studied by academics. Fragments recovered from the Pacific are displayed in museums, silent witnesses to the vanished flight, while pilot logs and official reports preserve the memory of a journey that ended without closure. The fate of the clipper romance of the skies and those aboard continues to puzzle experts, a somber reminder of the unpredictable power of the sea and sky. Every year on November 8th, memorials honour the passengers and crew, acknowledging both their lives and the enduring mystery that surrounds their final flight. The account of Panama Flight 7 continues to provoke thought on humanity's fleeting power against the immense untamed waters. Pilots, passengers and families are forever linked to this chapter of aviation history, reminding us that despite advances in technology and navigation, some events resist explanation. The loss of the Stratocruiser teaches that preparation and experience can sometimes meet forces beyond control, leaving only fragments and memories. Though the Atlantic, Pacific and other oceans have claimed countless flights, the story of Flight 7 stands out for its abruptness and the unanswered questions it leaves floating across the endless horizon. The vanishing of Air India Flight 855. On January 1, 1978, Air India Flight 855 took off from Bombay, now Mumbai, heading for the island of Dubai with 213 passengers and 14 crew members aboard. The Boeing 747, named Kangchenjunga, had been prepared for the flight with routine checks and a full load of passengers eager to reach the New Year celebrations abroad. Outside, the early morning sky was streaked with light clouds, and the ground crew waved farewell, unaware that the aircraft would disappear without warning less than half an hour later. The departure was smooth, and radio communications initially showed nothing unusual, giving the illusion of a routine journey. Captain M.S. Ganapathy sat in the cockpit with co-pilot V.G. Datt and flight engineer S.R. Shastri, maintaining a steady course over the Arabian Sea. Ganapathy was known for his calm demeanour and thorough preparation, having flown for Air India for more than a decade. Passengers chatted quietly, some reading newspapers, others watching in-flight movies, while attendants moved through the aisles with tea and snacks. As the plane climbed to cruising altitude, radar signals were steady and controllers in Bombay cleared the flight to continue its path westward. Moments before the first signs of trouble, the autopilot was engaged to maintain a stable heading. Cockpit voice recordings later suggested that the crew remained calm, communicating precise manoeuvres and attempting to stabilize the plane until the final seconds. Instruments in the cockpit, however, began to show conflicting readings. The artificial horizon indicated a slight tilt that was not visible outside. Captain Ganapathy sought to cross-check the readings, but in a rapid sequence of seconds the aircraft began an unexpected descent. Alarms sounded in the cockpit, and the co-pilot called for immediate action, but the ocean below was closing in too fast. The passengers, unaware of the precise danger, felt a brief unsettling motion before the plane plunged. Air traffic controllers noticed that Flight 855 was no longer responding to transmissions. Initial attempts to reach the Boeing 747 were met with silence, sparking concern that quickly escalated into alarm. Radar screens, which had shown a steady westward movement, now depicted the aircraft descending at an alarming rate. The controllers in Bombay attempted to coordinate with ships and nearby aircraft to pinpoint the location, but the plane vanished from radar before any assistance could reach it. The first search and rescue efforts began within hours, with Indian Navy ships dispatched to comb the Arabian Sea. The search eventually involved over a dozen ships and multiple aircraft from neighbouring countries, underscoring the international attention the disappearance had drawn. Planes from the Indian Air Force joined the operation, flying grid patterns across the water in hopes of spotting wreckage. Despite the intensity of the search, the initial hours yielded no substantial findings, only small floating objects carried by currents. Among these were fragments of cabin interiors, personal belongings of passengers, and life vests, offering grim confirmation that Flight 855 had crashed into the sea. It was later determined that a cockpit instrument failure, the artificial horizon, resulted in the crew losing spatial awareness over the water at night. Without a visible horizon, pilots relied entirely on instruments, which can become disorienting if one fails. Experts suggested that Captain Ganapathy's attempts to correct the aircraft's tilt may have unintentionally worsened the situation. The Boeing 747, despite its size and advanced engineering for the time, was vulnerable to sudden human error compounded by instrument failure. The review extended to nighttime oceanic flight training, revealing that pilots at the time had limited exposure to long stretches of instrument-only navigation. Simulators available in the 1970s could replicate instrument failure, but rarely simulated multiple failures simultaneously, as happened on Flight 855. This gap in preparedness emphasized the need for enhanced pilot education on spatial disorientation and error recognition. Recommendations included mandatory simulator sessions specifically designed for instrument malfunction and the development of cockpit procedures to better manage sudden instrument discrepancies. In cities like Bombay and Dubai, families waited tensely, eyes fixed on television screens for any hint of news. Many had planned holidays or business trips, and their absence was a growing concern. Air India arranged counselling and support for relatives, while journalists covered the disappearance, drawing attention to both the airline's history and the risks of night flying over open water. Speculation grew in newspapers, some focusing on technical failure, others on rare weather events, though the Arabian Sea had shown no unusual conditions at the time. Partial recovery of Flight 855's wreckage occurred months later, bringing up fuselage fragments and cockpit instruments from the deep. These fragments confirmed the sequence of events leading to the crash, but could not restore the lives lost that night. The investigation highlighted the critical importance of instrument reliability and crew training in handling emergencies over open water, especially at night. Recommendations were made to improve redundancy systems in aircraft, and Air India incorporated these lessons in future flights. In response to the crash, aviation technology advanced, introducing multiple redundant attitude indicators and smarter autopilot systems that could identify and correct errors in real time. Airlines worldwide reviewed and upgraded their maintenance protocols to include more frequent calibration of critical flight instruments. Flight 855 thus indirectly contributed to broader safety reforms, shaping policies that continue to influence how modern commercial aviation prevents and responds to in-flight instrument failures. Even several years after the crash, the disappearance of Air India, Flight 855, remains a somber lesson in aviation history. Memorials in Mumbai honour the crew and passengers, remembering names that were lost in an instant and lives that were cut short. Pilots study the accident to understand human factors, instrument dependence, and how rapid decisions can have irreversible consequences. Each January 1st, the anniversary is observed quietly, a reminder of how quickly a routine flight can turn tragic over seemingly calm seas. Through Flight 855, we are reminded of the uncertainty of night flights over oceans and the precariousness of human reliance on equipment. Aviation professionals recall the event when discussing cockpit procedures, emergency response, and the limits of even the most sophisticated aircraft. For those who lost friends or family, the ocean remains both grave and mysterious, hiding secrets beneath its dark surface. The disappearance, while investigated thoroughly, leaves questions about that night in January 1978, and the voices of the passengers remain suspended in memory, never to return. The silent disappearance of Flying Tiger Line Flight 923. The Pacific sky was eerily calm on the night of March 23, 1962, as Flight 923 of Flying Tiger Line prepared to take off from Travis Air Force Base, California. The crew, consisting of Captain Robert Harris, First Officer William Lambert, and 2 flight engineers, performed their usual pre-flight checks with practiced efficiency, unaware that this routine trip would end in one of the most baffling aviation mysteries of the era. Cargo loaded onto the Douglas DC-6B was primarily high-priority military supplies, which made the flight an essential link between the US mainland and its Pacific bases. The early evening light painted the tarmac in shades of orange and red, and ground personnel waved as the plane taxied toward the runway. Within minutes, Flight 923 lifted into the sky, engines humming steadily, leaving behind a trail of anticipation and routine. The departure was smooth, and the first radio communication was made shortly after takeoff, confirming the flight's altitude and heading over the coastal waters. Flight controllers at Oakland reported everything normal as the DC-6B climbed toward its cruising altitude of 16,000 feet. Visibility was excellent, and no unusual weather patterns were reported along the route to Hickam Air Force Base in Hawaii. Passengers were not on this cargo flight, but the sense of duty among the crew gave a quiet intensity to their actions as they monitored instruments and checked fuel levels. By 9:15 p.m, the plane had reached a point over the open Pacific where radar coverage was intermittent, leaving the aircraft briefly invisible to controllers on land. All systems were reported functioning normally in what would become Flight 923's final routine transmission. Shortly after, the radar blip that represented the plane vanished without warning. Air traffic controllers frantically attempted to re-establish contact, but no response came. Panic began to ripple through the control room as they realized something extraordinary had occurred. The DC-6B had not sent any distress signal, nor were there reports of severe weather capable of downing a plane. Specialists later reviewed weather logs and found only minor turbulence, nothing that could explain a total disappearance. Hundreds of miles of ocean were scoured in the immediate search, yet investigators found nothing of consequence in the days afterward. Ships and planes combed the waters, scanning for debris or oil slicks, yet only a few small items, believed to be related to Flight 923, were eventually retrieved. A life vest here, a fragment of cargo there, but no trace of the aircraft's main fuselage or engines surfaced. Navy divers and Coast Guard crews scoured the seabed in shallow areas near Hawaii, hoping to locate wreckage, but their efforts were fruitless. Each passing day deepened the sense of mystery and frustration among investigators, who could not reconcile the aircraft's sudden disappearance with standard aviation protocols. Scrutiny of the DC-6B fleet's maintenance and performance records became central as investigators considered mechanical failure. The plane had been inspected thoroughly before departure, and all systems were reported fully operational. The engines were reliable, and the aircraft had a history of successful trans-Pacific flights. Even after reviewing the crew's experience and skill, no obvious human error emerged as a factor. Pilots familiar with flight, 923's route described it as straightforward under normal conditions, further deepening the puzzle of why the aircraft vanished so completely. After Flight 923 failed to reach its destination, aviation authorities were compelled to investigate and revise safety practices for cargo flights over vast seas. Procedures for emergency communication, tracking, and search and rescue coordination were scrutinized and eventually updated, including stricter check-ins at radar gaps and improved reporting systems for missing aircraft. Military logistics also faced renewed pressure to ensure that high-priority shipments were accounted for in real time, highlighting how a single unexplained incident could ripple across operational planning and influence policy decades later. Attention shifted to unusual atmospheric conditions, such as potential microbursts or strong wind shears, though meteorologists found no proof of extreme weather along the route. Some suggested magnetic anomalies or even experimental military activity in the area, but these claims remained unverified and largely speculative. Witness reports from ships and nearby planes yielded nothing conclusive, as no one recalled seeing a crash or unusual lights in the sky. The ocean seemed to swallow all traces, leaving only silence where Flight 923 had once traversed. In a haze of uncertainty, kin of both flight and ground personnel waited, their only lifeline the fragmented updates from officials. Each report of minimal debris or fleeting leads raised hope, only for it to vanish under closer scrutiny. Captain Harris's wife, Margaret, organised correspondence among other families, hoping shared communication might reveal overlooked clues. The absence of closure weighed heavily on everyone connected to the flight, as months turned into years with no definitive answers. Memorial services were held, but they felt incomplete, marked by uncertainty and the haunting knowledge that the crew's fate was unknown. Years passed, yet the case of Flight 923 drew constant attention from experts, who searched for clues in the shadow of other ocean vanishings. The DC-6B remained a reliable plane, making mechanical failure seem unlikely. The notion of a sudden structural failure was considered but lacked evidence, as even minor wreckage was virtually absent. Theories ranged from catastrophic but contained explosions to the plane descending so rapidly that it left no floating debris. Each new idea led to more questions than answers, cementing Flight 923's reputation as one of the most perplexing cases in commercial aviation history. Advances in technology, from satellite tracking to underwater sonar, have failed to reveal new information about Flight 923's disappearance. The case is often cited in studies of missing aircraft and discussions of risks involved in long overwater flights. Aviation historians note the psychological impact on both the families and the wider flying community, illustrating how uncertainty can linger far longer than the physical presence of a plane. The DC-6B's fate remains a symbol of the ocean's vastness and the limits of human knowledge, a silent reminder of the risks inherent in early transoceanic air travel. Occasionally, expeditions are organised by enthusiasts and researchers eager to find remnants of Flight 923 beneath the waves. Reports of unusual sonar readings spark brief excitement, but none have led to concrete findings. The story of Flight 923 continues to inspire documentaries, articles, and discussions about the mysterious disappearances that shaped aviation safety protocols. For those who study or remember the event, the silence of the Pacific remains the final testimony, holding the secrets of Flying Tiger Line Flight 923 and the crew who vanished into it. The lost Avrotudor of the North Atlantic. On a quiet evening in January 1948, a British Avrotudor aircraft named Star Tiger prepared for a routine flight from Santa Maria in the Azores to Gander, Newfoundland. The aircraft was a large, 4-engine passenger plane, carrying 31 people, including passengers and crew. Weather reports indicated some cloud cover and light snow over the North Atlantic, but nothing that suggested imminent danger. The flight took off without incident, ascending into a sky gradually darkening with winter dusk. Despite its ordinary appearance, the aircraft would soon vanish in one of the most perplexing aviation mysteries of the 20th century. The Tudor was part of British South American Airways, which had commissioned the plane to serve long-distance transatlantic routes. It was designed in the post-war years to compete with larger American aircraft, and though it had completed earlier flights successfully, there had been whispers about technical quirks in the cabin pressurization system. Some crew members had expressed concerns over unusual engine vibrations, and a few passengers later recounted feeling anxious before the flight, though no official report suggested imminent danger. Although cutting edge for its time, the Avrotudor saw a brief service life, with only a few units ever produced. Unlike its American counterparts, it relied on a pressurization system that was still experimental in commercial aviation. Engineers later noted that the Tudor's engines were prone to subtle fluctuations in power output under certain atmospheric conditions, and minor incidents had been reported on other flights, including cabin pressure warnings and temporary radio failures. These factors, while not considered critical at the time, have fueled ongoing debate about whether the Star Tiger's disappearance was purely accidental or a combination of technical vulnerability and environmental stress. Minutes after departing Santa Maria at 1907 GMT, the Star Tiger sent a standard position report to Lajes Airfield, indicating the flight was proceeding as planned. The voice over the radio was calm, professional, almost casual. After this, the aircraft disappeared from radar screens. For several hours, ground controllers received no further transmissions, and attempts to contact the plane were met with silence. Initial reports assumed a technical delay or radio malfunction, but as hours passed, it became clear that something far more troubling had occurred. Teams mobilized to find the plane and survivors without hesitation. Ships patrolled sections of the North Atlantic near the flight path, and aircraft scanned the waters from above. Despite a massive effort covering thousands of square miles, no wreckage was found. The ocean seemed to have swallowed the Tudor completely. Later reports confirmed that the aircraft's last known position was over open waters, far from land or established shipping lanes, leaving investigators with no obvious clues. The plane appeared to vanish as if it had never existed. Various interpretations were suggested to make sense of the disappearance. Some suggested a sudden mechanical failure. The Tudor had faced issues with its fuel system, and investigators considered whether a leak or engine malfunction could have caused a catastrophic failure. Others proposed structural problems. The pressurized cabin, which allowed the aircraft to fly at higher altitudes, was relatively new technology at the time. If a pressurization failure occurred, it could have incapacitated the crew before they could radio for help. Each explanation seemed plausible, yet lacked concrete evidence, leaving the mystery unresolved. Weather conditions over the North Atlantic that night were also a factor. Reports indicate that temperatures dropped sharply, and turbulent clouds extended across large areas of the flight route. Some meteorologists argued that ice accumulation on the wings could have interfered with lift, or that sudden, severe turbulence might have forced the aircraft into a rapid descent. Even in this scenario, there was no wreckage to verify what had happened. Debris, seats, luggage, or even oil slicks were absent from the search zones, deepening the sense of unease around the case. Without any accounts from those on board, the mystery grew all the more chilling. Families of the 31 passengers and crew were left without answers, receiving only official notices of disappearance. Among those lost were Mrs. Joan Miller, travelling to join her husband in Canada, and Captain James S. May, a respected pilot with decades of experience. Records suggest Captain May had successfully flown similar routes in the past, and there was no reason to doubt his competence. Their sudden loss contributed to a growing concern about the reliability of the Tudor series for long transatlantic flights. The incident prompted official investigations by both British and Canadian authorities. Reports were compiled over months, detailing aircraft specifications, flight logs, weather conditions, and radio communications. Yet, even with thorough documentation, the conclusions remained inconclusive. Some investigators noted that the Tudor series had flown safely on other occasions, and no significant design flaws could be conclusively blamed. The combination of limited evidence and the harsh remote environment of the North Atlantic left a void in understanding that has never been filled. In hindsight, the disappearance of Star Tiger fit into a pattern that left experts increasingly uneasy. Just a year later, another Avrotudor, the Star Ariel, vanished under similar circumstances on a flight between Bermuda and Kingston, Jamaica. The similarities between the two cases led some to speculate about a possible design issue or an unexplained hazard along transatlantic and Caribbean routes. Both aircraft disappeared without a trace, and despite advances in aviation safety and search technology, no wreckage from either flight has ever been conclusively identified. It is not only the unanswered questions, but also the desolate, engulfing expanse that keeps the story of the Star Tiger alive. The North Atlantic, vast and unforgiving, leaves few clues when tragedy strikes, and the Tudor's disappearance remains a stark reminder of the uncertainties faced by early long-distance air travel. Researchers, historians, and aviation enthusiasts continue to study the case, analysing flight plans, weather records, and survivor testimonies from other flights. Each detail contributes to a fragmented understanding, yet the central mystery, the aircraft simply disappearing into the ocean, persists. Modern breakthroughs in underwater exploration have brought renewed focus to locating the Tudor's resting site. Autonomous underwater vehicles and deep-sea sonar mapping have scanned regions of the North Atlantic consistent with the Star Tiger's flight path, yet no definitive wreckage has emerged. The case has also influenced modern safety protocols, contributing to stricter aircraft maintenance checks and the implementation of more reliable transatlantic tracking systems. While the Star Tiger may never be found, the lessons learned from its loss continue to shape aviation safety standards and underscore the challenges of early long-range commercial flight. Time has not dulled interest in the Star Tiger, which still inspires careful study and widespread speculation. Modern technology allows for sonar mapping and deep-sea exploration, yet the Tudor has never been located. Families continue to honour the memory of those aboard, and the case appears on lists of the most baffling aviation disappearances of the 20th century. In the end, the Tudor's loss is not just about a plane vanishing, it represents the limits of human knowledge and the enduring power of the unknown, floating silently somewhere beneath the cold, dark waters of the North Atlantic. The mystery of the missing Douglas, C-54 Skymaster. NC 88,843, a Douglas C-54 Skymaster, left San Juan, Puerto Rico, heading toward Miami, Florida, on a bright afternoon in December 1947. The aircraft carried 56 people, including passengers and crew, and held a full load of cargo. Weather reports along the flight path indicated mild winds and no storms, making it seem like a routine journey. Yet, as the plane crossed the Straits of Florida, all contact with air traffic control suddenly ceased. Attempts to radio the Skymaster produced only static, and within minutes it seemed to vanish completely from radar. The C-54 was operated by Pan American World Airways, one of the largest carriers of the era. Designed during World War II for long-haul transport, the Skymaster had a reputation for reliability, and its 4 engines were considered robust for transcontinental flights. The flight crew included Captain Robert L. Jackson, a pilot with more than 10 years of experience, and First Officer Henry K. Phillips, who had previously flown similar routes without incident. Both men were respected for their professionalism, and there were no reported disputes or concerns among passengers before departure. Around 14:32 Eastern Standard Time, the aircraft made its last routine radio transmission, confirming its position over the Florida Strait. The voice was calm, almost casual, with no mention of any trouble. Moments later, radar readings showed the plane disappearing from monitoring stations. Controllers at Miami and Key West attempted repeated contact, but no response came. Initial speculation suggested radio failure, yet the total disappearance of the aircraft, along with all on board, quickly became evident. The hunt kicked off on the same day, with Coast Guard cutters and Navy ships scouring the Florida Strait, while seaplanes and land-based aircraft searched from above. The waters were clear, and weather conditions remained favourable for visibility. Despite a coordinated effort covering hundreds of square miles, no debris, life rafts, or oil slicks were found. It was as if the Skymaster had simply melted into the ocean. Investigators struggled to find a starting point, with only the aircraft's last confirmed position as a reference. Initial hypotheses suggested a technical malfunction. Some experts considered the possibility of a sudden engine problem or fuel leak that could have led to an uncontrolled descent. Others examined the aircraft's cargo manifest. Records show the flight carried mail, personal luggage, and essential supplies, but nothing flammable or hazardous enough to cause an immediate explosion. Investigators also reviewed maintenance logs from the weeks before the flight, noting routine servicing and no significant repairs that might indicate imminent danger. Climatic conditions remained under consideration. Reports indicated that while the surface skies were clear, pockets of turbulence existed over the Gulf Stream. Some meteorologists suggested that strong wind shear or unexpected microbursts could have affected the aircraft's stability, particularly if the plane was flying at lower altitudes to avoid clouds. Yet, these conditions would likely have left at least some floating debris or signs of distress, and none appeared. Sparse and inconsistent testimonies made the investigation difficult. A few fishermen reported seeing a plane in the distance near the Florida Strait around the estimated time of the flight, describing it as flying lower than usual. Others claimed to hear faint engine noises but saw nothing afterward. None of these accounts could be verified, and investigators were left to rely on technical data, radar traces, and pilot records. Every avenue seemed to raise more questions than answers. Aside from eyewitness reports, radar logs from nearby military installations revealed brief, unexplained blips that some analysts speculated could have been NC 88,843. These signals appeared to deviate sharply from the planned flight path, suggesting the aircraft may have made an abrupt maneuver. While the data was inconclusive, it raised questions about whether the Skymaster experienced sudden mechanical failure, evasive action to avoid turbulence, or even an external interference that disrupted its trajectory. Analysts noted that such deviations were rare in commercial aviation at the time, making the Skymaster's disappearance even more perplexing. The case of NC 88,843 drew parallels with other unexplained disappearances in the region. Aviation experts noted the similarity to incidents involving other military and commercial aircraft in the region during the late 1940s. The Skymaster's sudden disappearance, with no emergency signals or traces of wreckage, added to the sense of mystery surrounding early post-war aviation. The case also highlighted the challenges of flying over open water, where even experienced crews could encounter dangers that left no evidence behind. Devastation struck the families of the 56 passengers and crew. Among the missing were Mrs. Eleanor Graham, travelling to Miami to visit relatives, and Lieutenant James H. Carter, returning from duty assignments in Puerto Rico. Communications with next of kin were limited, and official notices provided little more than confirmation of disappearance. Many families refused to accept that the plane could simply vanish, hoping for years that survivors might eventually emerge, yet none ever did. The Civil Aeronautics Board and Pan American executives took part in months-long government investigations. Officials examined navigation logs, radio transcripts, maintenance schedules, and even the design of the C-54 itself. Some reports suggested minor vulnerabilities in early models of the Skymaster, including potential electrical malfunctions, but no evidence directly linked these issues to the disappearance. The final investigation report concluded that the plane was lost over the Florida Strait, but the exact cause remained undetermined. The inquiry also included an assessment of how human factors could have affected the outcome. Crew fatigue, spatial disorientation, or navigational errors were considered, especially given the flight's timing in late afternoon, when sun glare over the water could have affected visual cues. Although both pilots were experienced, the CAB report acknowledged that even seasoned aviators could misjudge altitude or position over featureless stretches of sea. This line of inquiry, while speculative, highlighted how human limitations combined with mechanical and environmental challenges could lead to a sudden, untraceable disappearance. With time, the tale of NC 88,843 became part of aviation history, alongside other unexplained vanishings in the region. Decades later, historians and researchers still study the incident, analysing flight patterns, ocean currents, and surviving records to speculate on what might have happened. Some suggest the plane may have descended too low, striking the water without leaving traces in strong Gulf Stream currents. Others propose sudden structural failure, or an unknown combination of mechanical and environmental factors. Each hypothesis provides a possible explanation, but none can be confirmed. The C-54 Skymaster's disappearance serves as a reminder of the uncertainties that early long-distance flights faced. While aviation technology has advanced, the ocean remains a vast, unpredictable environment where even modern planes can meet unexplained fates. NC 88,843 continues to haunt researchers and families alike, a silent ghost over the waters it crossed, leaving only questions behind. The mystery of the missing Skymaster is not only about an aircraft lost, but also about the limits of observation and control, in an era when the skies and seas were still largely unknown. The disappearance of Transair Flight 810 near Hawaii. A routine flight turned into a chilling mystery when Transair Flight 810, a cargo Douglas DC-6, lifted off from Daniel K. Inouye International Airport on August 2, 2021, bound for Honolulu with a load of heavy equipment. The weather seemed calm at first, with light trade winds brushing the Pacific, but the routine would soon unravel into chaos. Crew members radioed in with a sudden engine problem shortly after passing the Makapu Peninsula, and the last communications hinted at escalating trouble. What started as a standard journey quickly became an alarm that would draw the attention of the Coast Guard and local authorities. People on the coastline reported a trail of smoke behind the struggling plane, though poor visibility obscured its ultimate path. The plane, built decades earlier but still in service, had a reputation for reliability, making the abrupt emergency all the more puzzling. Air traffic controllers tracked its erratic movements as the pilot attempted to navigate toward a safe landing point, but the DC-6 seemed to lose altitude faster than expected. Witnesses later described the plane as wobbling, almost floating before it disappeared, swallowed by the endless blue. Radar data later revealed that the aircraft had deviated slightly from its planned flight path before reporting engine trouble, suggesting the crew may have been attempting to avoid a storm system forming near the northern coast of Oahu. Meteorologists noted that although conditions seemed mild overall, sudden microbursts could occur, creating unpredictable turbulence over the water. This subtle shift in trajectory may have contributed to the challenges in controlling the plane as it struggled to maintain altitude. Inside the cockpit, the crew faced a harrowing situation that combined technical failure and the unforgiving expanse of the Pacific. Captain Lacey Heeger, a veteran with years of experience flying cargo routes, remained calm over the radio, reporting engine trouble and preparing for an emergency landing. Co-pilot Jesse Herod worked to stabilize the aircraft, but the heavy cargo made the plane less responsive. The conversation captured in the flight recording shows a meticulous attempt to troubleshoot, yet despite every effort, the situation deteriorated rapidly. Operations to find the aircraft started right away, involving Coast Guard helicopters and ships patrolling the waters of its last known coordinates. The initial reports were sparse. Only small debris and traces of fuel were spotted amid the waves, offering few clues to the aircraft's final moments. The currents of the Hawaiian waters complicated the search, dispersing wreckage over a wide area. Every hour that passed without a major discovery intensified fears that the plane and its crew could vanish entirely beneath the waves. Coverage by local news focused on the extraordinary circumstances, with interviews of witnesses and experts discussing possible explanations. Some noted the age of the aircraft, while others suggested mechanical failure or human error. Analysts pointed to the difficulty of maintaining older cargo planes on rigorous schedules and the potential for sudden malfunctions even during routine flights. Despite these assessments, nothing concrete emerged, leaving the disappearance shrouded in uncertainty and prompting questions that remain unanswered. When night descended on the islands, search operations pressed on under bright floodlights, with divers and sonar-equipped vessels scanning the ocean floor. The vastness of the Pacific made the task daunting, and even the most sophisticated equipment could only cover so much. Families of the crew were left in suspense, relying on updates from the Coast Guard and aviation authorities. The tension and silence around the unfolding situation created a haunting sense of helplessness, magnified by the immensity of the surrounding sea. The Coast Guard also deployed unmanned drones equipped with thermal imaging to search areas too dangerous for divers at night. These drones captured fleeting heat signatures near floating debris, hinting that parts of the cargo or aircraft structure remained partially intact on the surface. While none confirmed the location of the cockpit or crew, the data provided the first concrete indication of where to concentrate the next phase of recovery efforts. Recovered debris offered small fragments of evidence but no definitive explanation. Sections of the fuselage, engine parts, and personal items were found scattered across miles of open water. Each piece raised questions rather than answers. Why had the plane gone down so quickly, and why had no distress signal indicated a catastrophic failure? Investigators examined the recovered components meticulously, looking for signs of structural failure, fire, or other malfunctions, but every analysis added layers to the mystery rather than solving it. The investigative team expanded their work past visual inspections, applying sophisticated forensic techniques to study metal wear, corrosion patterns, and tiny traces on engine components. Specialists from the National Transportation Safety Board (NTSB) collaborated with Hawaiian aviation authorities and even consulted experts in older aircraft restoration to piece together how a plane with a solid maintenance record could fail so abruptly. International cooperation also played a role, with agencies in Canada and Europe providing comparative data on similar DC-6 models and historical incident patterns, emphasizing how the disappearance of Flight 810 could inform future safety protocols for vintage aircraft still in operation. From nearby vessels and coastal homes, eyewitnesses offered fragmented views of the flight's final moments. Some described the aircraft dipping sharply before leveling briefly and then disappearing entirely, as if swallowed by the sea. Others reported faint trail of smoke, consistent with mechanical trouble but not enough to reveal the severity of what had occurred. These fragmented observations only deepened the intrigue, leaving the final moments of Flight 810 as a sequence of unconnected, eerie snapshots. Through flight logs, radar tracking, and radio transmissions, authorities have reconstructed parts of the journey, but the complete chain of events is still uncertain. Experts consider multiple factors, including engine failure, overloading, and sudden loss of control, but no single explanation fits all the details. The aircraft itself, despite decades of service, was well maintained and had passed recent inspections, making the crash an unexpected and disturbing anomaly in aviation records. Beyond the technical investigation, the disappearance of Flight 810 left a profound mark on the local community and the broader aviation world. Pilots and cargo operators expressed heightened concern over flying older aircraft in unpredictable weather, while residents near Oahu recounted lingering anxiety and vivid memories of smoke streaks against the horizon. Aviation safety seminars in Hawaii began incorporating lessons from the incident, emphasizing preparedness for sudden emergencies and the importance of real-time tracking systems, demonstrating that the impact of Flight 810 extended far beyond the ocean waves that claimed it. In the hearts of Hawaiians and the minds of aviation experts, the disappearance of Flight 810 endures. Families, investigators, and aviation enthusiasts alike are left with fragments of a story that may never be fully told. The DC-6's final flight, marked by courage, technical skill, and sudden catastrophe, remains an unsettling reminder of how quickly a routine journey over the ocean can transform into an enduring enigma. Even today, the waters near Oahu hold pieces of this mystery, silent witnesses to the aircraft that vanished without a trace. The vanishing flight of the Lockheed Constellation over the Atlantic. Under an unusually clear New York sky on May 2, 1951, the Lockheed Constellation 749 stood ready for its transatlantic voyage to London. Passengers boarded with the anticipation of a routine journey, unaware that this crossing would soon become one of aviation history's enduring mysteries. The aircraft, operated by Eastern Airlines, had completed similar flights before without incident, and the crew, led by Captain James Harding, was considered highly experienced in transoceanic routes. Ground personnel noted that pre-flight inspections showed no visible mechanical concerns, and weather reports predicted calm conditions across the North Atlantic. As the Constellation lifted into the bright morning, radio operators maintained the usual schedule of position reports, which were transmitted every hour to the New York and London control centres. At 11:17 a.m, the aircraft reported passing a waypoint near the Azores, providing the last confirmed communication from the flight. The message was routine, indicating normal operation and altitude, but the tone carried no hint of the impending disappearance. The radio operator noted some minor static, which was not unusual for long-range transmissions over the ocean, but nothing that would alarm those monitoring the flight. By late afternoon, controllers in London grew concerned when the scheduled report failed to arrive. Attempts to contact the aircraft produced no response, prompting immediate alerts along the intended flight corridor. Rescue coordination centres in both Europe and the eastern United States began plotting search areas based on the last confirmed location, but the vastness of the Atlantic presented an overwhelming challenge. Ships in the region were mobilised, and early reconnaissance flights were dispatched, combing the ocean for signs of wreckage or survivors. Around the time the Constellation was anticipated to fly by, sailors on nearby vessels observed a plane in the distance, though reports on its altitude and speed conflicted. Some sailors described a metallic glint against the sun, while others claimed to see nothing out of the ordinary. These discrepancies fueled speculation about whether the aircraft had encountered sudden mechanical failure, turbulent weather, or navigational error. Despite the lack of concrete evidence, investigators examined every possibility, from engine issues to fuel miscalculations, acknowledging that even minor errors over the open sea could become catastrophic. Examining the aircraft's upkeep records, investigators hoped to find any overlooked issues that could account for its disappearance. The Constellation had undergone routine servicing before departure, and documentation indicated no outstanding mechanical problems. However, technicians noted that the aircraft's hydraulic system had been replaced a few months earlier, which, while functioning normally during the last inspection, introduced a potential point of failure. Engineers considered that under heavy stress, such as unexpected turbulence or sudden manoeuvres, even a small malfunction could impair the crew's ability to control the plane. Midway through the second day of the search, naval vessels reported floating debris and fragments of aircraft fabric far from the projected flight path. While none of the pieces could be conclusively identified as belonging to the Constellation, their presence deepened the sense of urgency. Divers and reconnaissance planes scanned the ocean surface for additional clues, encountering only isolated flotsam scattered across hundreds of square miles. Every recovered item was catalogued meticulously, but the lack of identifiable aircraft components made it impossible to confirm the aircraft's final location. Using echoes and atmospheric interference readings, radar stations along Europe's coast worked to reconstruct the Constellation's final trajectory. Analysts considered the effects of strong winds, possible magnetic deviations, and even electrical storms, yet the reconstruction produced conflicting possibilities. Some models suggested the aircraft could have strayed hundreds of miles north or south of its planned route, while others implied it might have descended rapidly due to sudden loss of control. Each scenario left more questions than answers, with no survivors or distress signals to clarify what had occurred. As news came in sporadically, families waited in apprehension, piecing together fragments of speculation and the sparse information available. Public interest surged as newspapers detailed the flight's routine departure and the mysterious failure to arrive, emphasizing the Constellation's reputation for safety and the experience of its pilots. The absence of bodies or wreckage only intensified the mystery, prompting theories ranging from catastrophic engine failure to more far-reaching suggestions, including unreported weather phenomena. Emotional appeals from loved ones highlighted the human cost of the disappearance, even as investigative teams continued to comb the Atlantic with little success. Months after the flight vanished, the official inquiry concluded without definitive answers, noting that the most plausible explanation involved a combination of mechanical failure and navigational error in an area where rescue efforts were severely limited. The final reports cited the lack of concrete evidence as the primary obstacle, acknowledging that over time, the likelihood of discovering significant wreckage would diminish due to ocean currents and depth. Despite extensive research, analysis of maintenance records, and testimonies from ship crews in the region, the Lockheed Constellation over the Atlantic remained lost to history. Buried within dusty records, potential leads kept the case relevant, compelling experts and enthusiasts to look for what had been missed. Some amateur researchers claimed to find correlations between the disappearance and similar incidents involving early transatlantic flights, particularly issues with the aircraft's pressurization system and long-range navigation errors. Others explored meteorological data from May 1951, suggesting that microbursts or sudden storms could have created unexpected turbulence, potentially overwhelming the aircraft's systems. Apart from that, archival communications logs have revealed subtle inconsistencies in the aircraft's last transmissions. Some experts suggest that slight timing delays and signal distortions might indicate the plane encountered unexpected atmospheric anomalies, such as sudden ionospheric disturbances, which could have interfered with navigation systems. These anomalies, rare but documented in the North Atlantic, provide a plausible explanation for the aircraft veering far off course without any distress signal. Furthermore, contemporary analysis of similar Lockheed Constellation flights during the early 1950s shows a recurring pattern of minor hydraulic and fuel system irregularities under prolonged high-altitude operation. While none of these incidents resulted in loss of life, researchers argue that the combination of stress factors, turbulence, extended flight duration, and minor mechanical inconsistencies could have compounded rapidly, creating an almost invisible chain reaction that left the aircraft vulnerable during its Atlantic crossing. From time to time, minor traces, like unidentified debris or first-hand accounts from deep-sea fishermen, sparked renewed hope that the Constellation could eventually be located. Advances in underwater search technology, including sonar mapping and remotely operated vehicles, raised the possibility that remnants of the aircraft could eventually be located on the ocean floor. Until then, the flight's disappearance remained an unsettling reminder of the risks inherent in early transatlantic air travel, a mystery marked by the silence of the Atlantic and the lives that vanished without a trace. The lost DC-3. Over the Amazon jungle. A thick morning fog hung over the banks of the Rio Negro on October 12, 1947, as the Douglas DC-3 prepared for its routine flight from Manaus to Belém. Passengers loaded their bags and settled into the cabin, unaware that the journey would turn into one of South America's most enduring aviation mysteries. The aircraft, operated by rail transporters Aéreos, had a reputation for reliability, and Captain Álvaro Santos, with over 15 years of flying experience, was confident in the safety of the route. Ground crews reported no mechanical issues during pre-flight checks, and local weather seemed stable, though the jungle often concealed sudden storms. After takeoff, the DC-3 quickly gained altitude, leaving the twisting river and the vast Amazonian forest below. Radio communications remained routine as the crew reported their position to regional control towers. At 9:47 a.m, the last message was sent, confirming a smooth climb and cruising altitude. Moments later, the signal ceased, leaving controllers in Manaus puzzled and increasingly worried. Attempts to re-establish contact went unanswered, signaling that something had gone wrong over the vast uncharted jungle below. From the outset, search operations faced extraordinary obstacles, as the dense Amazonian canopy made the terrain almost impossible to navigate. Planes sent from Manaus could only glimpse fragments of clearing between the trees, and rivers twisted unpredictably through this forest, offering few reliable landmarks. naval and military units coordinated with local tribes to mount ground searches, but the rugged terrain slowed progress. Any crash site was likely to be isolated, hidden beneath layers of thick vegetation, and survival beyond the initial impact seemed unlikely without immediate rescue. Inhabitants of the remote riversides reported the sound of an aircraft engine giving out while aloft. Eyewitness accounts described a sudden, low-flying plane trailing smoke before vanishing behind the dense canopy. While these reports could not be fully verified, investigators included them in their reconstruction of the flight's final moments. Many speculated that the DC-3 may have encountered an unexpected downdraft or severe mechanical failure, but with no wreckage to confirm, the theory remained uncertain. Days into the search, the rainforest yielded scattered evidence. Twisted metal fragments and charred debris found along riverbanks, though none could be conclusively identified as belonging to the missing DC-3. Rescue teams meticulously documented each find, hoping a recognizable part, such as the aircraft's wing or propeller, might reveal the crash site. The Amazon's humid climate and constant rainfall complicated preservation, and each discovery offered more questions than answers, leaving authorities frustrated and families desperate for news. Maintenance logs were analysed by investigators to pinpoint any factors that could have contributed to the disappearance. The DC-3 had been serviced 2 weeks prior, with minor repairs made to the fuel system and control surfaces. While nothing appeared out of the ordinary, specialists considered the possibility that the dense, humid air could have contributed to engine issues. The route's long stretches over uninhabited terrain demanded precise navigation, and even a minor miscalculation could send the plane far off course, deep into inaccessible jungle. Much later, researchers examining satellite and aerial imagery noticed faint clearings, leading some to believe they might obscure remnants of the missing plane. Analysts pointed to irregularities in tree patterns and unusual land scarring that could indicate a crash, though confirmation was impossible without an on-site investigation. Scholars and aviation enthusiasts debated whether natural changes in the landscape over decades might have hidden any trace entirely, leaving the DC-3 as one of the Amazon's lost mysteries. River communities nurtured legends of the vanished plane, speaking of strange illuminations and the ghostly echo of engines through the night forest. While these tales added to the flight's mystique, they also complicated the factual investigation, mixing folklore with the hard realities of aviation disappearance. Journalists reported on both eyewitness accounts and speculative theories, drawing public fascination to the case, which seemed increasingly unsolvable as the years passed. Efforts to piece together the flight's trajectory relied heavily on survivor accounts from other flights along the same route, comparing wind patterns, river markers, and average speeds of similar DC-3s. Analysts suggested that the plane may have been forced to make an emergency descent due to sudden weather shifts, but the combination of dense forest and the lack of modern navigation aids made exact reconstruction nearly impossible. Each scenario remained hypothetical, relying on probabilities rather than tangible proof. By 1948, after months of extensive searching, official reports concluded that the DC-3 had likely crashed somewhere deep in the Amazon, but no definitive location was ever confirmed. Families continued to hope for a breakthrough while authorities acknowledged the limitations of jungle search operations. The mystery persisted, leaving the disappearance as a cautionary tale about early aviation over remote and unforgiving terrain. Well, after it had gone missing, attention returned to the DC-3 as adventurers and documentarians attempted to trace its final path. Using modern equipment such as drones and satellite imagery, teams attempted to identify remnants that could confirm the aircraft's fate. Some fragments of aluminum and old aviation gear were found in isolated areas, yet none were conclusively linked to the missing flight. These intermittent discoveries only deepened the intrigue, proving that the Amazon still concealed its secrets. Modern improvements in forensic analysis and mapping technology have revived public and investigative interest in the DC-3 case. Specialists in aviation archaeology have begun using LiDAR scanning to penetrate the dense jungle canopy, revealing depressions and unusual terrain formations that were invisible to earlier search teams. While no confirmed wreckage has yet been located, these scans have allowed investigators to narrow down potential crash zones, providing hope that decades-old mysteries may finally yield concrete evidence. Some researchers have also cross-referenced old eyewitness testimonies with these digital maps, attempting to reconcile folklore with geographical data to pinpoint areas where debris could have accumulated. Concurrently, archival research has provided insight into aviation patterns in the Amazon during the late 1940s. Post-war Brazil saw a surge in regional aviation, with small airlines like rail transporters aéreos pushing to connect remote cities despite minimal infrastructure. Pilot logs and contemporary reports indicate that sudden microbursts, tropical storms, and rapidly changing wind patterns were frequent hazards, often underestimated by crews relying on basic instruments. These environmental factors, combined with the logistical challenges of maintaining aircraft in a humid jungle climate, underscore the precarious conditions under which the DC-3 operated. Such insights not only provide a clearer understanding of the flight's disappearance, but also illustrate the enduring difficulties faced by early aviation pioneers over South America's most formidable terrain. The missing DC-3 became a legendary chapter in aviation, often used to illustrate the formidable challenges early pilots faced when flying over the Amazon. Experts noted that the combination of unpredictable weather, limited navigational technology, and the jungle's sheer density made survival of both aircraft and passengers unlikely once an emergency arose. Researchers and enthusiasts continued to study archival reports, hoping that even a single clue might one day reveal the truth about the vanished flight. The disappearance of Brunei Royal Flight 006. The morning skies above Bandar Seri Begawan were unusually calm on June 2, 1997, as the sleek Boeing 747-400 of Brunei Royal Flight 006 prepared for departure. The aircraft, carrying members of the royal family along with diplomats and crew, taxied quietly along the runway, its polished fuselage catching the first light of dawn. Captain H.J. Mot Noor bin H.G. Taha ran through the final pre-flight checks while co-pilot H.J. Sulaiman bin H.J. Yusuf monitored the instruments with practiced precision. Ground staff waved one last time before the aircraft lifted gently into the air, bound for Singapore. Few could have imagined that this routine journey would vanish into history as one of aviation's most baffling mysteries. The hum of the engines mixed with the occasional radio chatter, but soon the routine became unsettlingly silent as the aircraft climbed over the dense jungle in the South China Sea beyond. By the time Flight 006 reached cruising altitude, the cockpit reported nothing unusual. Radar screens confirmed a steady climb, and air traffic control in Singapore acknowledged the flight's expected approach time. Passengers reclined in plush seats, unaware that every mile travelled carried them farther from any chance of rescue. Cabin attendants moved quietly down the aisles, offering drinks and checking on the comfort of royal dignitaries and staff. Outside the windows, the horizon stretched into an endless blue, the ocean glinting under the rising sun, while deep beneath, no one could foresee the silence that would follow. The crew's practiced calm masked the tension that would soon grip the nation, leaving only routine operations on a plane that was about to vanish without a trace. A distress signal, brief and cryptic, cut through the calm. At 9:47 local time, Flight 006 sent a sudden transmission, reporting a rapid loss of altitude, though the exact cause remained unclear. Radar contact began to falter, flickering like a candle struggling against a wind. Pilots attempted to maintain control, their voices tense but measured, yet the last words heard over the radio carried no hint of the catastrophe unfolding. Search and rescue teams in both Brunei and Singapore scrambled to respond, but even the most advanced radar of the era could not trace the aircraft's final path. The usual routines of aviation gave way to an uneasy silence that left ground controllers staring at empty screens, wondering how a plane so large could disappear so completely. The hours ticked by painfully slowly as families of the passengers grappled with mounting worry. Rumours spread quickly, fueled by sparse reports from authorities and conflicting eyewitness accounts from other pilots in the region. Some claimed faint glimpses of a large aircraft near Pulau Muara Besar, while others insisted no trace had appeared at all. Investigators combed the flight plan and maintenance logs for clues, noting that the aircraft had undergone all scheduled inspections and that weather reports indicated only minor turbulence. The mystery deepened when no debris was found along the anticipated flight path, and no distress beacon seemed to transmit any further signal. Each passing hour compounded the sense of disbelief, leaving the disappearance suspended in a haze of uncertainty and speculation. Within 3 days, nations had contributed to the search, sending naval and air units across the expanse between Brunei and Singapore. Satellite imagery was reviewed meticulously, and sonar scans probed beneath the surface of the ocean, but each method yielded nothing. The aircraft's enormous size should have produced a significant signature, yet the search teams found only waves and scattered fishing vessels. Investigators began considering extreme possibilities: sudden structural failure, mechanical malfunction, or a rare atmospheric event. None could explain why an aircraft designed for long-haul flights could vanish without leaving even a fragment behind. The lack of physical evidence left experts frustrated, as each theory seemed plausible yet unverifiable. Newly released documents indicate that Flight 006's disappearance may have occurred during extraordinary weather phenomena over the South China Sea, such as microbursts and abrupt wind shear. Some investigators also noted anomalies in the aircraft's flight data recorder, suggesting intermittent electrical failures in the cockpit systems just minutes before the last transmission. While these findings remain inconclusive, they add a layer of technical complexity to the mystery, highlighting how a combination of environmental and mechanical factors could have contributed to the plane vanishing so completely. Several weeks on, scattered accounts came from isolated coastal villages, hinting that residents may have spotted debris, though nothing could be definitively tied to Flight 006. A single life vest was recovered, stained and weathered, but it lacked any definitive identifiers. Witness accounts described hearing a distant roar over the waves, followed by an eerie silence, aligning roughly with the timeline of the last transmission. Rescue crews meticulously catalogued each find, hoping it might reconstruct a chain of events, yet the pieces never seemed to fit together. Aviation specialists reviewed prior incidents involving similar aircraft, looking for patterns, but the disappearance remained unmatched in both scale and mystery. As months passed, the incident became etched in public memory as an unsolved enigma, a reminder of how quickly modern technology can fail against the vastness of nature. While government documents admitted the aircraft had vanished, they shed little light on the circumstances, leaving families anxious and confused. Flight manifests were scrutinized, from royal passengers to the technicians accompanying the journey. Analysts considered sabotage, pilot error, and sudden weather anomalies, yet each possibility was undermined by either lack of evidence or technical improbability. Public fascination grew, with journalists chronicling the story as one of the most perplexing aviation mysteries of the late 20th century. Even decades later, aviation enthusiasts and historians referenced Flight 006 as an example of how some aircraft, despite their sophistication and planning, could simply vanish from the sky. The case persisted as a somber lesson on the limits of human understanding and the fragility of life suspended in the air. Although investigators conducted extensive searches, the precise outcome of Brunei Royal Flight 006 is still unknown. The disappearance left a permanent scar on the nation, a reminder that even in controlled skies, uncertainty can strike without warning. Every radar blip, every unexplained sound over the ocean, remains a fragment of a story the world may never fully piece together. The event prompted improvements in flight tracking and emergency protocols, but it could not undo the sense of loss. Today, Flight 006 is remembered not only for the people it carried, but for the haunting void it left in aviation history, a mystery that continues to draw speculation, debate, and a quiet, uneasy reverence for the power of the skies. The puzzling case of the Fairchild F-27 in South America. A low mist clung to the Andes on May 15, 1969, as the Fairchild F-27 of Transporte Aéreo del Sur prepared for takeoff from La Paz. The twin-engine turboprop gleamed under the pale morning sun, and the crew moved with practiced efficiency along the tarmac. Captain Luis Mendez ran through the final instruments, while First Officer Carlos Rojas cross-checked fuel levels and weather reports. Passengers, mostly business travellers and a few local officials, boarded with the calm assurance of routine travel. The engines roared to life, blending with the distant sound of the city waking, but no one foresaw that the flight would soon plunge into one of South America's most baffling aviation mysteries. Ground staff waved farewell, noting nothing out of the ordinary, while the plane ascended into thin, crisp air, vanishing into clouds that seemed unusually dense for the season. The flight climbed steadily, skimming the jagged peaks that sliced through the horizon, and the cockpit instruments reported normal readings. Communications with air traffic control were brief but regular, with the crew confirming an expected route over the Altiplano toward Cochabamba. Passengers gazed through the oval windows at a landscape of valleys and snow-capped mountains, unaware of the tension that would erupt below. Flight attendants offered water and coffee, their movements almost ritualistic against the hum of the engines. Outside, clouds gathered like a soft curtain, masking the rugged terrain and concealing the plane's path from anyone watching from the ground. Even routine turbulence could not have hinted at the chain of events about to unfold. At 10:32, a sudden radio interruption broke the monotony. Air traffic control received only static, punctuated by a faint, hurried message that Captain Mendez had trouble controlling the aircraft. Radar blips that had previously marked the plane's progress began to scatter and fade, leaving controllers with only uncertainty. The F-27 was a sturdy aircraft designed for mountainous regions, and maintenance logs indicated it was in perfect condition. Yet its disappearance suggested something sudden and catastrophic. Rescue teams mobilized immediately, scouring valleys and mountain passes by helicopter, while investigators pored over weather patterns for clues. The Andes, though magnificent, were unforgiving, and the sheer vastness seemed hopeless almost from the start. By the afternoon, rumours of sightings had reached La Paz. Locals from remote villages spoke of hearing a loud engine roar followed by a strange silence, claiming it came from a gorge near the Rio Grande. Others insisted they saw an aircraft silhouette weaving through the clouds before vanishing. Search helicopters combed the region, but the dense forests and deep canyons frustrated every attempt to pinpoint the aircraft. Investigators considered the possibility of sudden wind shear or mechanical failure, but neither explanation accounted for the complete lack of debris. Every lead seemed to dissolve like mist over the mountains, leaving only questions that hovered as uneasily as the clouds above. The following day, relatives of the passengers gathered at the small airport in La Paz, their faces a mix of hope and despair. News reports described the mystery in detail, speculating about extreme weather, human error, or even rare atmospheric phenomena. Families pleaded for updates, but authorities could offer only cautious statements, emphasizing that the F-27's disappearance was unprecedented in the region. Each conversation added to the tension, and the weight of uncertainty pressed on everyone connected to the flight. Meanwhile, search crews expanded their efforts, deploying ground teams into uncharted trails and using helicopters to scan for any sign of wreckage, yet the mountains seemed to swallow both plane and hope alike. By the end of the first week, attention had shifted to technical analysis. Radar logs were scrutinized repeatedly, and meteorologists reviewed storm formations in the area, noting a sudden updraft recorded near the flight path. Pilot logs were examined, including Captain Mendez's extensive experience in mountain aviation, and nothing indicated error. Investigators debated whether a mid-air structural failure, combined with localized turbulence, could explain the disappearance, but no evidence of impact emerged. The mystery deepened when a small village resident reported hearing a distant explosion hours after the last transmission, though no confirmation could be made. Each detail, fragmentary as it was, only added layers to a puzzle no one could fully solve. Declassified records years later exposed that comparable aircraft in the vicinity had suffered from unexplained electromagnetic interference, resulting in temporary navigation issues. Some experts speculated that the F-27 may have flown through such a localized anomaly, which could have disrupted navigation and communication systems, leaving the crew unable to regain control. Though controversial, these insights added a technical dimension to the mystery, suggesting that natural or atmospheric phenomena beyond conventional meteorology might have played a role in the aircraft's disappearance. Weeks turned into months, and official reports remained inconclusive. International aviation experts were called in to advise, analysing similar incidents in South America, yet none mirrored the abrupt vanishing of the F-27. Satellite imagery, still limited at the time, failed to reveal wreckage, and sonar scans of nearby rivers yielded nothing. Theories ranged from sudden mechanical failure to extraordinary weather events, but each remained speculative. Families and colleagues endured a quiet grief, their memories anchored to the last known moments of the flight. The absence of closure transformed the disappearance into a legend of South American aviation, a story retold by pilots, journalists and local historians with a sense of reverent unease. As a testament to flight's vulnerability, the F-27 reflects the overwhelming power of the natural world. The Andes, beautiful and imposing, continue to guard the plane's secrets, leaving only scattered reports and incomplete accounts. Investigators occasionally revisit the case, examining newly available satellite technology and reanalyzing weather data, but the aircraft has never been located. Families continue to honour the lost passengers, recounting the story with sorrow and a faint hope that one day answers might surface. The flight stands as a testament to the unpredictable power of the mountains and the enduring mystery that a single ordinary journey can leave behind when it vanishes without a trace. The mystery surrounding the missing short Sunderland flying boat. A low mist hovered over the rugged coastline as the short Sunderland prepared for takeoff, its 4 engines vibrating with the intensity of anticipation, and Captain Jameson checked the instruments one last time, noting the subtle changes in air pressure that hinted at a storm moving in from the northwest. The crew, familiar with the challenges of patrolling the North Atlantic, moved with quiet efficiency, each action precise yet carrying the weight of countless missions flown over unpredictable waters, where survival often depended on skill and instinct rather than luck. Even the ground staff paused briefly to watch the flying boat lift from the water, its massive hull cutting through the fog like a phantom, and a sense of unease lingered in the damp air as the engine's roar faded into the distance. The Sunderland's destination was routine enough, a resupply drop for a naval station, but the Atlantic was never truly forgiving, and small uncertainties can become calamities without warning. Radar operators at the nearby base noticed unusual echoes shortly after the plane disappeared from visual contact, flickering across the screens in irregular bursts that suggested turbulence far beyond normal patterns, prompting brief radio chatter that was swallowed by static and then silence. Lieutenant Harris, monitoring the instruments, tried to reconcile the readings with weather reports that predicted only scattered showers, but nothing in the data explained the sudden loss of the Sunderland from all tracking devices, leaving a gnawing tension among the team who had grown accustomed to patterns even in unpredictable seas. Debriefing files later revealed minor discrepancies in fuel calculations, a factor that alone could never account for the disappearance, but added layers of mystery when combined with the lack of any distress signal. Late into the night, fishermen along the coast heard low, unidentifiable engine sounds that lingered beyond the plane's normal path, and when morning came, the waves carried fragments that may have been wreckage, though no clear debris was ever found. The locals, seasoned in reading the moods of the ocean, described it as a foreboding day, when the wind carried a strange chill and the sky was too grey for the season, and their accounts later formed part of the official investigation, though they remained anecdotal and frustratingly inconclusive. Investigators scoured maps and flight logs, attempting to piece together a path that might have intersected with violent weather pockets, yet each theory encountered a roadblock, either in missing coordinates or in the sheer absence of tangible evidence. The Sunderland's radio operator, known for his meticulous logs, had noted a brief interference pattern just minutes before the final transmission, a pattern that, in hindsight, hinted at electrical disturbances possibly caused by an unexpected storm cell, yet these details were buried in routine technical reports and overlooked by higher command until much later. The pattern itself, a series of fluctuating frequencies, seemed almost deliberate, as if some unseen force had interrupted the signal long enough to erase the aircraft from normal monitoring, leaving only a trail of questions about what the crew experienced in the last moments of their flight. Each signal anomaly, when analysed months later, provided more curiosity than clarity, with technical teams arguing over interpretations that often contradicted one another. On board, the crew would have been contending with more than just mechanical operations, facing the Atlantic's merciless winds and unpredictable currents, manoeuvring over waters that had claimed countless ships and aircraft before them, relying on training honed in war zones, yet confronting an unfamiliar stillness that could not be countered by skill alone. Meteorological records indicate a sudden microburst that appeared along Sunderland's route, a phenomenon too localised for standard warnings, which may have forced abrupt altitude changes, and pilots of the era had few instruments sensitive enough to detect such shifts until it was already too late. The thought of such invisible hazards hanging in the vastness of the ocean lends a haunting realism to the mystery, emphasizing how nature could render a sophisticated flying machine almost invisible. A rapid response mobilized ships, aircraft, and local reconnaissance teams, yet despite days of intensive scanning, the Sunderland seemed to vanish into the grey Atlantic, leaving no trace behind. Pieces of equipment turned up occasionally, small fragments that suggested catastrophic structural failure rather than a soft water landing, but nothing confirmed the exact fate of the crew or the aircraft itself. Letters and reports later collected from officers involved in the search describe a surreal atmosphere where radar blips seemed almost taunting, appearing momentarily before fading into nothingness, and every sighting prompted cautious hope only to be dashed by the vast, empty sea. Upon review years later, historians note that the Sunderland had faced several long-range flights in challenging environments. Each mission increases the odds of fatigue and minor errors compounding into disaster, yet no personal log survived to reveal the mindset of the crew in those final hours. The absence of communication, coupled with an apparent lack of wreckage, allowed the imagination to fill in details, creating theories ranging from rapid structural failure due to hidden defects to encounters with violent storms that move faster than technology could predict. Even contemporary aviation experts remain divided on the likelihood of mechanical failure versus sudden environmental hazards, leaving the story suspended in uncertainty, a rare disappearance that refuses definitive explanation. Vanishing over the Atlantic, the short Sunderland remains a silent witness to the risks of pioneering long-distance flight, showing that even experienced crews could disappear, and meticulous analysis often only confirmed one truth: the ocean's reach defied full understanding. Researchers continue to study flight patterns, weather logs, and anecdotal sightings, yet the Sunderland's final moments remain locked in mystery, a reminder that even the most advanced machines of the time were at the mercy of the elements. The disappearance, now etched into aviation history, endures as a symbol of uncertainty, where every fragment of information adds intrigue without revealing resolution. The vanishing of General Airways Flight 702. Rain pounded against the tarmac as General Airways Flight 702 prepared for departure from Lima's Jorge Chávez International Airport on March 14th, 1968, and the passengers shuffled in with umbrellas dripping water across the waiting lounge, unaware of the storm's subtle warning. The DC-6's engines growled to life, resonating through the hangar, while First Officer Manuel Rivera performed a final check of the instruments, noticing a slight fluctuation in the fuel gauge that he dismissed as minor, yet the memory of that moment would haunt investigators for years. The flight was scheduled to connect Lima with La Paz, carrying 33 passengers and 6 crew members, including Colonel Luis Herrera, who was travelling for military briefings, and the weight of responsibility rested heavily on the crew as the aircraft lifted into the grey sky. Tower controllers exchanged routine signals as the plane climbed steadily, reporting altitude and course every few minutes, until a sudden burst of static disrupted communications, leaving only fragmented phrases barely intelligible over the radio. Air traffic controller Raul Sanchez recalled seeing the radar blip waver before vanishing, prompting frantic attempts to re-establish contact, yet nothing responded, and the monitors blinked as if the aircraft had simply evaporated from the radar. Nearby flights were diverted and instructed to search for visual signs of Flight 702, but the mountains, cloaked in storm clouds and shadow, offered no clues. Minutes dragged on, each one heavier than the last, while the control room throbbed with tension as officers grasped the unfolding danger in the Andes. In the passenger cabin, the flight attendants had made routine announcements, unaware that a turbulence front was moving faster than expected, and their voices, calm and measured, contrasted with the subtle but growing panic outside the plane. Witnesses later recounted that Flight 702 had appeared to tilt sharply to the left as it approached a mountain pass, a movement that may have been the result of sudden wind shear, though without concrete evidence such claims remained speculative. The aircraft's last transmission included only an incomplete weather report, and historians continue to debate whether mechanical failure, pilot error, or the unpredictable forces of nature caused the disappearance. From the moment they were deployed, teams faced narrow valleys and ice-coated ridges, where the bitter cold transformed even simple movements into hazards. Helicopters struggled against the gusting winds, and mountaineers who assisted in the initial search described an eerie silence that followed the roar of the engines, as if the mountains themselves had swallowed the plane whole. Days of aerial surveys and ground expeditions yielded no wreckage, though villagers in remote areas claimed they had seen lights flash across the peaks the night of the disappearance, a detail recorded in investigative reports, but dismissed by some officials as folklore. Captain Javier Morales, the pilot with over 12 years of experience, had previously flown similar routes under harsher conditions, yet the Andes microclimates could turn familiar skies into lethal corridors. Investigators later noted that no emergency beacon was activated, and although the aircraft carried sufficient supplies for extended emergencies, the sudden vanishing suggested an event so instantaneous that the crew had no chance to react. Documents recovered from General Airways archives revealed internal memos expressing concern over limited weather forecasting in the region, a factor that may have contributed to the flight's tragic fate. High in the glacier above the valley, fragments of metal were uncovered months after the disappearance. Identification remained elusive, and the scant remains offered little clarity. The local shepherds recalled strange echoes reverberating across the cliffs, sounds resembling engines that grew faint and disappeared, an auditory memory that aligned eerily with radar data showing a sudden loss of the blip. Military and civil authorities launched extensive investigations, interviewing families and analysing the aircraft's maintenance logs, yet the lack of consistent evidence prevented definitive conclusions. Airline historians later speculated about the influence of sudden atmospheric pressure shifts, which can produce unexpected downdrafts in mountainous regions, making even routine navigation hazardous. Some theorists proposed that Flight 702 might have been forced off course by one such downdraft, dropping rapidly into a narrow ravine, but the steep terrain would have obscured any immediate traces. Correspondence from crew members on similar flights suggested that pilots often relied on visual cues as much as instruments when crossing the Andes, highlighting how small errors in judgment could escalate into disaster. Hope lingered in fragments for the passengers' families, who endured months of torment, even as authorities' statements slowly shifted from anticipation to the sober acknowledgement that the plane was likely lost. Letters and newspaper clippings collected decades later recount efforts by private search teams who combed glaciers and high passes with minimal results, recording sightings of faint metallic glints that could not be verified. Flight 702 entered aviation history as a case study in unexplained disappearance, sighted alongside other mysterious vanishing aircraft over South America, and the lack of closure left both investigators and relatives in an ongoing state of uncertainty. No amount of skill or preparation could protect Flight 702 from the unpredictability of nature. Even the most experienced pilots found themselves at the mercy of the skies. Each theory, whether mechanical, meteorological or accidental, provides partial understanding but no full resolution, leaving Flight 702 suspended in history as a silent enigma above the snow-covered Andes. The mystery endures, a cautionary tale of air travel in extreme environments, where every trace of human effort can be erased within moments by the indifferent landscape. The Lost Soviet Tu-1, 104 over Siberia. The dense Siberian horizon stretched endlessly, a pale grey canvas that seemed to swallow sound and light, as the Tu-104 prepared for its routine flight from Irkutsk to Moscow on a bitterly cold morning in November 1960. Passengers, many of them officials and engineers returning from a regional assignment, settled into the narrow cabin with its low hum of heating units and faint smell of fuel, unaware that this journey would dissolve into mystery. Outside, the ground crew moved with brisk efficiency, their breath visible in the frigid air, as the twin turbojet engines rumbled to life with a promise of swift ascent. The pilot, Captain Mikhail Ivanov, had logged thousands of hours in the air, yet even his experience could not anticipate the forces about to challenge every instrument and decision on board. A sudden shift in the Siberian wind buffeted the fuselage as the aircraft lifted, leaving behind a trail of frosted exhaust that hung in the air like smoke from a distant fire. Passengers pressed lightly against the cold window panes, glimpsing the snow-blanketed taiga that receded beneath them, unaware of the subtle mechanical warnings that began flickering on the control panel. The navigator, Sergei Petrov, noted minor deviations in the compass readings, yet the standard instruments showed no alarming fluctuations. Despite the routine appearance of the flight, an invisible tension had begun to settle over the cabin, an almost imperceptible uncertainty that only pilots could feel when the sky starts to behave unpredictably. Mile after mile of unbroken forest passed beneath the wings, the Tu-104 carving a path through clouds that thickened with an unnatural density. Radio chatter with air traffic control grew faint, sporadic, and sometimes indistinct, as if static were seeping into the frequencies with deliberate intent. Moscow controllers logged the flight's regular check-ins, noting nothing that would hint at disaster, and yet the silence that would follow in less than an hour would come to haunt aviation records. In the cockpit, a strange quiet had settled over the crew, the usual mechanical drone replaced by a tension-laden stillness that amplified every minor sound. The flick of a switch, the soft whir of hydraulics, the subtle vibration of jet engines under strain. From far below, observers later described seeing nothing remarkable, merely the aircraft's dim silhouette slicing the cloud layer before it disappeared. Villagers along the remote Siberian rivers spoke of a sudden gust that seemed to flatten trees momentarily, and hunters claimed they glimpsed a glimmer in the sky that vanished as if swallowed by the atmosphere. These scattered accounts would become the first threads of a story that official reports never fully resolved, each testimony hinting at a moment when human perception brushed against an unexplainable event. The Tu-104's disappearance would leave no wreckage in these regions accessible to search teams, intensifying the enigma that enveloped the flight. Inside the aircraft, the autopilot maintained a steady heading, while the crew attempted to cross-check instruments against one another, unaware that the navigational systems might have been subtly compromised by a combination of atmospheric anomalies and nascent technical malfunctions. The co-pilot, Anatoly Smirnov, adjusted dials and checked fuel levels, noting that minor discrepancies did not match standard calibration charts. A low hum from the electrical system fluctuated intermittently, yet none of the alerts registered as critical at that moment. Each adjustment and observation would later be scrutinized in reports, creating a maze of questions rather than answers, because no surviving evidence remained to confirm or disprove the precise sequence of events. The vast Siberian skies were known for their unpredictability, and on that morning an unusual thermal inversion may have generated sudden turbulence invisible to onboard instruments. Radar coverage in these remote regions was limited, and despite the era's technological advances, the aircraft moved in and out of the sparse monitoring range with unnerving ease. For the ground teams in Moscow, every routine status check became a record of normalcy, masking the first signs of anomaly. By the time the aircraft should have crossed over known waypoints, the first whispers of concern arose, yet no signal, no echo, no trace of the plane appeared to justify the mounting anxiety. Traversing ice-choked rivers and dense forest canopies, search parties uncovered no sign of the Tu-104, no evidence to illuminate the aircraft's final moments. Investigators speculated about high-altitude structural failure, rapid decompression, or even sudden electrical failure, but none of these theories could be confirmed without physical evidence. The vastness of Siberia's terrain meant that even a catastrophic fall could vanish completely under snow, ice, and dense woodland. Survivors were absent and the radio log ended abruptly, leaving an entire generation of engineers and historians with only conjecture and fragmented reports. Memories of passengers who had been scheduled to fly the route lingered in official records, highlighting the human cost hidden within a list of names and seat numbers. Families awaited news that never arrived, and colleagues filed reports with bureaucratic precision. Yet the heart of the mystery remained untouched. Photographs of the crew, routine flight manifests, and mechanical checklists became relics of a flight that seemingly dissolved mid-air. In classrooms and technical circles, the disappearance of the Tu-104 became an enduring case study, a cautionary tale of how even highly trained crews and reliable aircraft could encounter the unknowable. Faced with the disappearance, airlines and Soviet authorities wrestled with how to address the public, aware that acknowledging uncertainty might shake trust in the burgeoning commercial aviation sector. Rumours circulated among pilots and engineers about hidden dangers in the Tu-104 design, though no conclusive evidence ever confirmed these claims. The combination of secrecy, limited technology, and the sheer scale of the Siberian wilderness created a perfect storm in which a modern aircraft could simply vanish without a trace. The incident would influence aviation protocols for decades, as lessons drawn from the Tu-104's loss spurred changes in radar monitoring, communication procedures, and emergency response planning. The final flight of the Tu-104 continues to draw scrutiny as historians and aviation buffs piece together sporadic reports, fragments of documentation, and technical schematics, yet the full picture remains elusive. Every analysis underscores the same truth. The aircraft disappeared in a region so remote and so vast that human intervention was impossible. The tale of the lost Soviet Tu-104 over Siberia continues to fascinate because it defies conventional explanation, blending human achievement, environmental challenge, and the vast unknown into a story where certainty remains forever out of reach. The final flight of the Dakota C-47 over the Indian Ocean. With the first light over the Indian Ocean on July 12, 1947, the Dakota C-47 departed Ceylon for Karachi. The early light caught on the metal skin of the aircraft, glinting off rivets and panel lines, while the hum of its twin engines filled the cabin with a steady, comforting vibration. Passengers were mostly military personnel and a few civilian technicians, all of them seated in stiff canvas seats, their eyes scanning the endless stretch of water below. Captain R.S. Iyer, a veteran of the Second World War, ran through his checklist with practiced precision, unaware that this flight would soon vanish from radar and memory alike. Clouds formed a thick quilt across the horizon, shifting with each gust of wind, and the C-47 rose steadily, its propellers cutting through the moist, salty air. The radio operator, Flight Sergeant Lal, tapped out routine messages, reporting altitude and position with the measured cadence of experience. There was no sign of the storm brewing hundreds of miles away, only the deceptive calm of a vast open sky that could quickly turn perilous. As the hours passed, the sun climbed higher, reflecting off the ocean like a sheet of molten gold, and the aircraft maintained its course with remarkable steadiness. Over the open water, a slight vibration in the starboard engine caused Captain Iyer to glance at his instruments. The gauges fluctuated briefly but stabilized without incident, a minor warning that seemed insignificant at the time. Crew members chatted quietly about past flights and shared news from home, their voices carrying in the small cabin above the engine's drone. Outside, the ocean stretched endlessly, with the occasional glimmer of a distant ship or the flash of a flying fish breaking the monotony of blue. This sense of isolation would later haunt search teams, who combed thousands of miles of water without finding a trace of the Dakota or its occupants. Somewhere between the Maldives and the Lakshadweep Islands, the sky began to darken, and isolated clouds gathered into thicker formations. Passengers leaned against the cabin walls, peering through small windows as Captain Iyer adjusted altitude in response to sudden air pressure changes. The radio crackled with intermittent signals, the static occasionally swallowing words entirely, making communication with ground control frustratingly difficult. These minor interruptions were the last signs of normalcy before the flight disappeared into uncertainty, leaving nothing behind to mark its passage over the vast ocean. The aircraft passed over a thin layer of cloud, glimpses of turquoise water visible below. The co-pilot, Lieutenant Sharma, noted subtle changes in wind direction, logging them as a routine. Yet these adjustments failed to account for the invisible turbulence that would soon buffet the plane from all sides. Moments of calm alternated with sudden shudders, and the crew's training allowed them to navigate each disturbance without panic. Even as the aircraft drifted slightly off course, there was no reason to suspect the disaster that would follow, and the last log entries carried the same professional tone as hundreds of flights before it. Once the aircraft went missing, investigators found that the Dakota C-47 had been transporting a small shipment of sensitive military equipment, including encrypted communication devices bound for Karachi. This discovery fueled speculation that a covert mission might have overlapped with routine flight operations, though no definitive evidence ever emerged. At the same time, logs from nearby aircraft indicated unusual atmospheric interference that could have disrupted navigation instruments, pointing to a possible combination of human error and environmental anomalies as factors in the flight's fate. Hours into the flight, the C-47's radio gave only partial reports. Snippets of conversation with control towers in Colombo and Cochin, their signals weak and fading. Ground stations noted the aircraft's last confirmed position near latitude 7 degrees N, longitude 72 degrees E, a point surrounded by nothing but endless water. A minor squall appeared on the horizon, clouds forming into dark, rolling waves that seemed more ominous than usual. Passengers clutched seat edges or held each other quietly, sensing the tension that came from hours suspended over the vast open sea. Search operations began almost immediately after the aircraft failed to arrive in Karachi. Ships were dispatched from Colombo, Cochin and Bombay, their decks crowded with anxious sailors scanning the horizon for debris. Aircraft flew grid patterns above the Indian Ocean, but the water was unyielding. Life rafts, cargo and bodies remained elusive, swallowed by the ocean's expanse. Witnesses on nearby islands later reported seeing a small distant shadow moving over the waves, but by the time boats reached the coordinates, nothing remained. Investigators could only speculate whether a sudden mechanical failure, severe turbulence, or misjudged navigation had led to the loss. Months later, fragments of mail and personal items, along with small pieces of aluminum from the aircraft, washed ashore on scattered islands. They offered only a partial narrative, fragments of a journey that ended in silence. Families of the missing received wordless letters of condolence, while military reports catalogued the loss with clinical precision. The incident became a ghost story for pilots and navigators flying the Indian Ocean, a reminder of the unpredictable nature of the skies and the unforgiving stretch of water below. The Dakota's disappearance remained one of the most enduring mysteries of post-war aviation in the region. Subsequent flights followed similar routes with heightened caution, yet the final moments of Flight C-47 remained speculative. Scholars and aviation enthusiasts pieced together timelines, weather reports and radio logs, but the expanse of ocean refused to give up its secrets. The story of the Dakota C-47 became a symbol of the dangers inherent in early long-distance air travel, where vast distances, fragile technology, and the unpredictability of nature could erase even the most experienced crew from history. Years later, memorials in Colombo and Karachi honoured those lost, their names etched in stone for posterity. The ocean, indifferent and infinite, held on to the truth, leaving only records, anecdotes and fragments to hint at the flight that vanished over its waters. The tale of the final journey of the Dakota C-47 endures not only because of the lives it carried, but because it reminds anyone who looks across the Indian Ocean of the thin line between safety and the unknown, a line that can vanish without warning, leaving only silence and the relentless waves.